Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is the Nordic Football Podcast, and it is the 2024 season preview. We are back officially. I'm joined by my good friend and colleague, Steve Wyss, for another season. This will make it sort of year number 7, I think, or 8th season potentially. Steve, since 2017, we've been going. And of course, the new season in Norway is about to kick off this weekend, and our traditional season previews is where we're going to kick off things at the start of 2024. Before we get into all that, though, let's introduce the main man, Mr. Steve Wyss. How are you today?
Jonathan Fadugba, hello, how are you doing? This is indeed season number 8 for the Nordic Football Podcast. I need to count up the episodes because we're probably knocking on the door of 200 at some point this season, I think, which will be call for a celebration, won't it? But I hope you've been wintering well. This is actually episode number 2 of 2024. We did one around February time. Would have liked to have done a little bit more content, and apologies for being a bit quiet. I think a few out there had even maybe given up on us, Jonathan. I saw a couple of tweets, but no, there's still life in the old dog yet, and ready for another season in Eliteserien and Allsvenskan.
Never write them off, a famous commentator once said. And indeed, we are back. We've been a bit quiet. There's been an MBA course going on for one of us. All kinds of things going on. So it has been a hectic year. I know you're progressing extremely well in your own career, Steve, as well. You're moving from strength to strength in the betting world. So, yeah, things are happening, but we can never forget our loyal listeners and followers of the Nordic Football Podcast. So we want to give a massive thank you to everyone who's shown us patience during times we might have been a bit more quiet in the last sort of 6 months or so. But of course, we cannot let a season preview go by. It's the flagship show. It's the main event. And we're going to get into it now pretty much. For those who have never listened to the show before, maybe, or if you're new, my friend Steve Wyss is a betting analyst and also an expert in Norwegian football, spanning must be close to 2 decades now. I mean, it's definitely 1 decade, but I know you're getting
Don't make me feel too old, Jonathan.
I know you're getting on a bit there. So, Steve is a Norwegian expert. I mean, Steve, I don't know if you want to give just a bit of an overview of your background in Norwegian football, just for the listeners.
Probably, yeah, it is knocking on the door of 2 decades now. Obviously, there was a period where I used to follow all of the summer leagues across Europe, Sweden, Norway, Finland as well, and Iceland. And I think the Norwegian league always was the one that sort of captured my heart, but also my sort of analyst brain.
Yeah, and it's an interesting wider debate, really. One we won't get into now, but we might get into as the season progresses. I've got a personal hunch that more and more people are turning off maybe some of the bigger leagues in Europe and maybe turning towards other leagues. I've seen personally in my work, non-league football getting more and more popular. The women's games getting more and more popular, for example, as another sort of startup league, if you could call it that, growth league. And I think we're seeing a little bit of that in Scandinavia. I think there's never been more interest. I remember last season, Steve, some of the sort of new accounts popping up here and there, fantasy accounts. Fantasy league was never been more popular, I don't think. So I think it's a good time for us. We're always ahead of the game, Steve, I think I'd like to say. Maybe our time's coming in terms of the interest, because I definitely think there's more interest these days, as you've mentioned there. But let's not wait too long. Let's get into this. Basically, the format for this show. The season starts in Norway on the 31st of March 2024, the 2024 Eliteserien. What we do is we will preview every single team. Steve has been working diligently on his analysis in the background for the last few weeks or months. We keep spreadsheets and we keep databases on every team pretty much in both leagues. Our backgrounds are in analysis in football, of course, through companies we've worked for together in the past. And basically what we're going to do is preview every team. And Steve is going to give his predictions from 1 to 16 in the league. Now, looking back a year, Steve, your season predictions last season were okay. But you did predict Molde to win the league. So you had a bit of at the top of the table, maybe you missed out a little bit. But generally speaking, your analysis is very spot on. And that's why you're so respected in this field. I want you to just talk about the champions first. Now, you don't have to tell me where they're going to be. But I think because they won the league last season, I think it's fair if you start with them, just because it's a good place to start, I think. So can we start with the champions first from last season, Bodø Glimt? And then you can drop in where you think they're going to finish, either at the end or at the start, up to you.
I'm just trying to find out the last time I predicted a champion correctly. I'm looking back on our spreadsheets. I didn't get it right last year. I didn't get it right the year before. I don't know what my 2021 prediction was. So this has not been a great sort. It's been a bit of a poison chalice, whoever I predicted as champions in the last sort of 3 or 4 years. So I need to get this one right. But we always actually usually start with the defending champions anyway, as a sort of rite of passage, don't we? And the defending champions are, of course, Bodø Glimt, who have caused. I mean, when we started doing these podcasts, like the Bodø Glimt were probably in Obos again, weren't they, Jonathan? And we never could have foreseen what they've become. They've become a really big team in Scandinavia now, a proper machine. I look at the setup they've got, and it's quite frightening, really, what they've become. I mean, they're a conveyor belt for talent, selling players at a good price, bringing players in, sometimes sort of short term now as well. They're obviously incredibly well managed off the field, and on the field they've been delivering some fantastic performances. Bit disappointing that they didn't qualify further in the Europa League. Ajax were very lucky against them, I thought. So it would have been interesting to see them against Villa. But what's changed? Armel Pellegrino, who's been part of the furniture in the last few seasons, he's been part of the furniture for the Nordic Football Podcast, hasn't he, for a while? He's gone out to the States, so that's a big loss, obviously, for them there. And Faris Mombania transferred to Marseille, so two big attacking weapons departed them. Not too much change in other areas of the field. And really, it's about who they brought in. You're looking at Jens Petter Hauge and Håkon Evjen, two former academy talents, have returned to the club. August Mikkelsen's come in from Hammarby. Big news in the coaching department as well. The addition of the Tromsø manager, Gorta Helstrup, and Jostein Gundersen coming on a free from Tromsø as well. And I think that's probably a good place to start, actually, the coaching area of Glimt, Jonathan, because there was obviously a massive shock with this Tromsø's manager coming in as his assistant. And Kjetil Knudsen has signed a new deal until the end of 2025.
Yeah, I mean, let's look at that. That is, there's a bit of a bombshell going on there. And actually, it's caused quite a steam. Even so, I've seen sort of non-Nordic accounts talking about this. The Glimt-Tromsø rivalry, Steve. This is something that's been a bit of a core theme now. I even saw our friends at Scouted Football. They commented about the sort of, it can only probably just be described as a bit of a land grab, a bit of territorial domination here, Steve. What just give a bit of context. I've seen a lot of angry Tromsø fans on Twitter over the last sort of 3 or 4 months. Glimt are sort of they're doing a bit of a Bayern Munich, aren't they? They're taking the competition.
Yeah, it's what I call ruthlessness, and I think for the first time, I mean, everyone apart from Tromsø fans kind of enjoyed their rise to prominence, and certainly the first title they won, I think everyone was pretty happy to see them do it because it was great for someone different, and all that, and it's been great to see them kind of stay up there, and there's been some great rivalries, especially with Molde, but I think for the first time, there's maybe people might look at Glimt and think, do you know what, they're kind of really asserting their dominance now, or trying to assert their dominance. It's very much territorial waters. Both clubs are located inside the Arctic Circle. Tromsø, the most northerly professional football club in the whole world. And I think what happened last season, and we'll talk about Tromsø later, hint, I've not got them too high this year, as always. But I think what's happened is last season, Tromsø did really well, finished third. I liked the direction they were going in. And I think a big part of the direction was the manager, Gorta Helstrup. And I think Glimt have just tried to swat them down like a fly by basically taking their manager and possibly their best player, certainly best defensive player, for nothing. And I mean, this is a big thing. I mean, why? I'm still trying to work out why Gorta Helstrup would move from a managerial position to assistant, has he been given some assurances down the line that he may well take over as head coach? Did he think that maybe Knudsen would move on this summer and he could worm his way in? Because now Knudsen's extended this deal to the end of 2025. That doesn't mean anything, of course. Managers, he might,
Just sorry to interrupt, but you've just highlighted the sort of they're taking a manager, best player you said there, and a few others. Can you just, for the listeners who might not know who you're talking about, just who are those people that you've just referred to there? I know some might know, but for those who don't.
Well, Galter Helstrup, the manager, has moved to Glimt now to become just assistant manager at Glimt. It's not a manager swap. He's just become an assistant. Jostein Gundersen, a centre-back, a lifelong Tromsø player right from the youth system, has come on a free. That's a big loss. And then they also seem to have a habit of nicking players, not necessarily directly from Tromsø, but players that have got a history to Tromsø. Like August Mikkelsen, for example. He's a year at Hammarby. But he's another sort of, before that, he was kind of Tromsø for life. There's been players like Runar Espejord was another one who's come in from there. I'd be really pissed off if I was a Tromsø fan. I would hate Glimt if I was a Tromsø fan so much, because they are just they're really getting annoying now, I think, from that perspective. And it's a ruthlessness. I think they really want to take over that territory in the north. It's like, anyone good coming through in that area, we're having them. Tromsø can have them for one season, but we'll have them after that sort of thing. And I think they recognised that Tromsø were maybe becoming a force again, and they just wanted to squish it like a fly, like I said. So yeah, it's a big thing in that region, and it's Bayern Munich-esque. They've done it down the years, haven't they? So that's that aspect discussed.
Yeah, Tromsø finished on the podium last year, finished third place, had a really good season, despite some people said not really being too high on them. Cough, cough. But like you said, a bit of a ruthless move from Glimt. And Glimt have always been a sort of popular team. Before we come to your prediction, they've always been a popular team in Norway, haven't they? They've kind of given teams like Rosenborg a bit of a punch in the face, and they've kind of upset the apple cart a little bit in Norwegian football. But are they sort of becoming the bad guys a little bit? Is this maybe a turning point in terms of within Norwegian football? Are people going to, because I've seen, you mentioned Tromsø fans not happy. I've seen a lot of comments about August Mikkelsen, and Glimt Tromsø fans are really unhappy. Is there a bit of a turning point here in terms of Glimt's narrative as like plucky outsiders to sort of now people thinking, wait a minute, well, are these the bad guys now of Norwegian football? And how does that affect them in terms of, being the dominant force at the moment? Is it going to make teams more determined to beat them? Does it affect your season prediction? Does it affect how teams are going to approach them, if you get what I mean? Like, just give us a bit of that context from a tactical point of view, how it's going to impact them this season.
It did feel like a turning point when I saw the announcement about Galter Helstrup in January. They kept it really quiet. It was really completely unexpected. And that was the first time in my mind I was thinking, do you know what? They're going to get quite a lot of hate here for this. And I guess it's part of evolution in football, isn't it? Clubs eventually will, if you want to stay on top, you've got to start to become ruthless, haven't you? Will it affect sort of how liked they are across the whole of Norway? I think it's a different matter, because it's just so regional up there. They don't really have a rivalry with Rosenborg too much. They've got this rivalry with Molde, which seems to be quite beneficial in terms of they've both egged each other on. They've both become better because of it. And then you got the southern part of Norway, which I don't really think there's any sort of bad blood with, like Brann and Viking and that. So I don't think it will affect them too much overall. But the signs are that maybe once you start doing those sort of things, you maybe become quite arrogant. Maybe you'll then start to try and stamp on some other teams as well. I could see it happening. And if they play their cards right, they could really become a serious power horse, because the money they've been generating from the players and the sales is huge, really, in the last 2-3 years. And yeah, they're getting towards becoming like a serious, they could have like a decade-long, not dominance, but a decade-long always in the mixer sort of thing, which is unthinkable from where they used to be.
Let's wrap it up then. One key man one key departure that could really affect them? I know you've mentioned Pellegrino, but maybe there might be one or two others. And then your season prediction for Bodø Glimt, Steve. Where are they going to finish this season?
A key departure, obviously, is Amal Pellegrino, who's been the main man for the last 2 years, so technically great. But he was no spring chicken anymore at 34. And, they kind of knew he was probably going to be going. So, like I said, I think they've signed pretty well. I'm predicting them as champions. I was torn for quite some time between themselves, Molde. We'll talk about Brann soon, but I've just looked, really. I think they've got really a big squad full of quality. They've got a fantastic manager who, by the sounds of it now, maybe he will want to try and fulfill the ambition to get them in the Champions League group stages. I think that's the one nagging thing that's keeping Knutsen here. After that, who knows what happens. But I just think they've got a loaded squad. Goalkeeper's probably the only area I'm not massive on with them. Kaikin's not a bad keeper, but he's not elite or anything. Defensively, they've got all bases covered. In midfield, is quite sick, really. Patrick Berg, Saltnes, Grombeck. I mean, that's far too good, isn't it? I mean, the likes of Evian, Vinchbecker, Horga, August Mikkelsen now. Yeah, they've got loads. And they've got youngsters, of course, knocking on the door as well. So, yeah, I think for me, they were excellent last season. I think they can stay in the gold medal position. They will be distracted by Champions League football qualifiers in the summer. I think they'll put a lot of eggs into that basket. So you do have to factor that in. Around that period, they might drop points in the league. And that made me a little bit wary about them. And I've said for a while, we are seriously due a close race. And maybe it will come this year. But I've just got to give them the edge because I think they've got the overall extra bit of quality and depth.
There you have it. Bodø Glimt predicted champions. Fantastic stuff from Mr. Steve Wyss. And I'm just looking back at your Eliteserien in 2021 predictions, and that is indeed the last time you got this right. So maybe you're going to make it 2021 to 2024 correct predictions. You did predict Glimt that season. You had Vålerenga in second. And yeah, you got it right because they did win the league in 2021. So let's move on to your prediction for runners-up. Who is going to be the closest challenger, Steve, to Bodø Glimt?
Molde for me. I think Bodø Glimt and Molde are still the two best sides in Norway, really. Molde, despite only finishing fifth last season, everyone kind of knows really they are, and along with Glimt, the two big power horses. We saw that in Europe. We saw them progress nearly to the quarterfinals of the Conference League. Gave it a really good go. And the Norwegian coefficient is now in an excellent position now because of the runs of both of those sides in recent years. So Molde are a very strong team and will challenge for the gold medal again. The last time that they lost the league, they came back quite well in the 2022 campaign. So I wouldn't put it past them to rebound again. What's interesting, Jonathan, is whenever they play against Glimt, I actually think Molde have got the edge. They've beaten them in 2 Norwegian Cup finals now. They've generally had a good record against them in the league in the last 2 or 3 years. Since they changed to a 3-5-2 system, I think Erling Moe, the managers, had the better of Knutsen a little bit, actually. They recently beat them in a pre-season friendly 5-3. That doesn't actually mean too much for me. There was a lot of players missing, but quite a few were using that as evidence that, maybe Molde beat them this year. But they do, in the head-to-head, they do. I like them in a matchup against them, and that's important. So can't underestimate them there. Molde have got a lot of quality in their squad. Especially a player that we will be talking about, Fredrik Gulbrandsen, is everyone's kind of favourite to win the Golden Boot this season. Former player, had a whole year off with an ACL injury around 2016, 2017. Did the rounds with the Red Bull teams. Now he's back, scored the winner in the Norwegian Cup final last year, been in red-hot form pre-season and in Europe. So they've got a really nailed-on attacker, which is, Glimt don't have that right now. That might change. So I think that's a massive bonus. They've also still got the old dog, Magnus Wolff Eikrem, who, when he's on the field, will be one of the best technical players on the field if they can keep him fit. They've got a lot of defensive options. Midfield has been added nicely with Mats Molde and I think Isaac Amundsen, actually, from Glimt for nearly £1 million is a really interesting signing. He'll be motivated to do well. Along with, you like to see Breivik, Hedstad and Korsas. This is a really loaded squad as well. So they're bound to, they will improve on 5th place. And, they're not in the Champions League qualifiers this year, which should help them. And I think it's them or Bodø Glimt for me, but I'm just going to put Molde in 2nd place.
Yeah, and it should be noted they've won the Cup in the last sort of 2 seasons as well, like you mentioned there. What is it that makes Molde, in your opinion, the closest challengers? And let's look at the key business that has been done to maybe try and challenge a bit more this season, because they didn't have the best of seasons, as you mentioned, their 5th last season. And they were 19 points behind Glimt. So what have they done to be able to close that gap this year?
I think the first thing to say is that they underachieved in the Eliteserien last year, right? 5th place is far too low for a club of their caliber. And, there definitely was perhaps Viking, certainly Tromsø, overachieved massively. We've got to expect those, a regression there. And we've got to expect Molde to shoot up, certainly at least into the top 3. In terms of business, Mats Molde looks like an excellent addition. Nearly 40 Norwegian caps down the years. Played most of his career in 2nd Bundesliga, which is quite a good level, actually, isn't it, in Germany? Zweite Bundesliga. 1.6 million from Nuremberg. I like Amundsen, like I said. They've signed a supposed wonder kid from Mjøndalen, Sondre Gronas, 17-year-old, for nearly £1 million. I don't know how much game time he's going to see, but I mean, that bodes well for the future. They're going to have, Gulbrandsen's a big player because they didn't have him for most of last season. So suddenly they've got this reliable striker. Berisha, when he's available, he's another decent weapon, but it hasn't quite worked out for him at Molde yet. I actually probably prefer Christian Eriksen, the former HamKam man. I think has a bit more reliability about him, even as a striker. Injuries have been a problem for Molde. Like, you just look back the last 2 or 3 years that they have had problems. That concerns me. Is that a fitness problem? I don't know. And the other area of doubt perhaps would be goalkeeper, a little bit like Glimt, actually. Jakob Karlström is decent enough. Would you class him as elite? I don't know. In fact, the likes of Oliver Pettersson have been challenging him, and they've even signed a guy for $500,000 from Poland called Albert Posiadala. So there could be a bit of a race for the goalkeeper spot this year. But why 2nd? Why in the title race? Because they've simply got a proven manager. They've got a really big squad depth, decent quality, and ultimately, I think over the course of 30 games, I really can't see them certainly outside the top 3 this year. And I'm predicting them 2nd.
The gap will be less than 19 points in your opinion, but what will the gap be if you had to predict it? And talk to us a little bit about Molde's manager. He's done very well. We've praised him a lot on this podcast, haven't we? But are we expecting is there anything in pre-season that's made you think they might change maybe the way they play? Is there any players they might particularly focus on to try and get something out of? Is there any young talents? Is there what could you see maybe different that the manager might do this season?
So on the expected points table, according to Y-Scout, our partners Y-Scout, last season, Glimt 60.9, and Molde actually finished 2nd in the expected points table, 53.8. So that's a gap of roughly, 7 points. So the true gap was about 7 between the two sides. So based on that, that's what they've got to close. Now, what is going to happen in terms of differential? He's not going to be changing formations. That formation's going to be fine. What they've got to make sure they don't mess up games that they basically dominated last season and didn't win. If they change that and stay on the coattails of Glimt, I've said for years that we are due a really. I think one of the titles in the last 5 has gone to the last game of the season, but really Glimt only had to beat, I think, Mjøndalen. It would have taken a decent swing and goal difference as well. Could we get a nail biter? Goes right to the distance. Something, let's say, less than 3 points to deter. Just by sheer law of averages, Jonathan, every now and then you do get a title that goes right to the wire, right? So maybe that I think I'm going to say that because I think Glimt will drop points in the summer when the Champions League's on, and both sides are likely to qualify for their respective group competitions. Molde should get in the Conference League. Glimt should at worst probably end up in the Conference League. So they'll both be playing European football probably in the autumn. But I think Molde, they've got to get that gap back. And if they just don't mess up the games that they dominated, then by default, they should just come back. So you asked me about Erling Moe as well, didn't you? Yeah, the manager is still underrated for me. Tremendous manager, tactically aware. And I think him and his coaching team develop players as well. Develop players really well tactically. Like if you look at on the field, there's a lot of really good sort of quarterbacks in Molde, really intelligent players. That's one of the big strengths of the squad. I think there's some great intelligence there, and they know their system and they know how it works like that. And Erling Moe deserves a lot of credit for that down the years.
Fantastic stuff. And yeah, I've noticed Mats Molde has gone there, hasn't he? From he's former Manchester United youth. I know he's been at Molde as well, and he's had a long career. He's only 20. Well, he's 29 now. Actually, he's quite old. But yeah, he's joined from Nuremberg, and I think you mentioned that earlier as well. I don't know if there's any sort of young talent that you want to keep an eye out for, and also key departure.
Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned this Sondre Gronas from Mjøndalen is a supposed wonder kid. I've not really seen any of him, so I can't comment too much yet. I quite like the lad that's gone on loan to HamKam, Nicholas Odegaard. We'll talk about him when we talk about HamKam. Key departure. For me, there's not really been one, For me, there's not really been a massive departure, which is going to affect them too negatively, which is, I mean, that's a big positive, I suppose, isn't it? And the key arrival is, for me, Mats Molde, just because he brings experience, technical quality, and, again, really strong intelligence to the team. They're a very clever bunch on the field, Molde.
Yeah, and for those who are new to the show, we do have our 10 to watches, which will be coming out in the coming week or so. And I can reveal exclusively that Steve does have one Molde player on that 10 to watch list, but I will not reveal who. So you'll have to stay tuned for that one. We'll have a lot of content for you. Stay tuned. If you subscribe on Nordic Football Podcast on YouTube, you can also follow us on Twitter/X at Nordic Footpod. And of course, all other channels pretty much, I think. Mind you, we don't have a TikTok, do we, Steve? Maybe we should sort that out. I don't know.
What is TikTok?
Don't know if we've got
I don't know. I've never got involved with TikTok.
I don't know if we've got the time for that, I think, to be fair. But so you got Glimt to win the league, Molde second. Who is your final team on the podium, Steve, in third place? Take it away.
I'm going with Brann in third place. A team that actually kind of proved me wrong last year. I did say that they would sort of fizzle out a bit, didn't I? And they, in the end, they actually went from strength to strength. Absolutely, Erik Horneland has done a fantastic job here since taking over. Absolutely blitzed the Obos again. Won one of the Norwegian Cups that was on offer last year, and then led them to a silver place finish. And there's no doubt they finished like a train. You watch them play; they're really well drilled, high intensity, things like that. But I think that could be perhaps an issue because this is now the third season of Horneland's tactics. And I mean, if you certainly look at some of the data, they're probably they're the biggest pressing team in Eliteserien, and they were in Obos as well. Passes per defensive action allowed. That is an area where Brann only allow their opposition 6.78 last season, which is so far clear of the next team, which was Lillestrøm at 10.56. So they're intense pressing. They win the ball back quickly, physical, and he's got them in good shape. But I know what it's like, and I don't want to compare Erik Horneland to Bielsa or anything, but I've seen it at Leeds. We played really high intensity soccer for quite a long time, and eventually it kind of caught up to us a little bit. And it's quite a small squad. Is this Brann squad? There's quite a lot of players here who have been used to this system for it will be now their third season. And what's going to be in the tank? What's going to be in the legs by, the autumn period? Will a few be tiring out? I don't know. I mean, it sounds a little bit harsh, but I'm just looking at differences here that might a reason why they might not win the title, sort of thing, because I've seen quite a few people put them in the mixer to win that gold medal and certainly compete, and they may well do. But the squad, the size of the squad worries me a little bit, Jonathan. I'm not going to lie, but I do see them in clear third place because I just don't think anyone below is going to be above them, apart from Glimt or Molde, because they've got some fantastic weapons. They're really well coached. They're really well supported, and they've got a lot of momentum.
Yeah, and they had a really good season last season as well, didn't they, Steve? In terms of just newly promoted side finishing second, incredible achievement, really level on points with Tromsø, but better goal difference. They averaged 2 points basically pretty much per game. You've got them in third place this season. Do you think they will compete for the title, or do you think they'll be significantly lower than Molde and Glimt?
I think they can compete for the title if we get a sort of a low points tally that wins it. If we're talking 70 points to win the league, I don't think Brann can get there. But if we're talking sort of low or mid 60s, they've got maybe an opportunity. They are a team that overachieved their expected points by 10 last year. So that's something to look at. Will they regress a little bit there? They've got, Bård Finner, they rely a lot on him. He's been unbelievable last year. He's such a key player for them. They've got perhaps maybe the best left back in the league, best fullback in the league in Joachim Saltvedt, can play on either side. He was a great signing from Sarpsborg last season. Every fantasy team's going to probably have Finner and Saltvedt in them to start with, especially as Brann have a double game week in game week 3. They've got in the midfield, Sivert Helter Nielsen might be the best player in his defensive midfield position across the whole league as well. So such a warrior, such an inspirational leader. So the spine of the team is really strong. The goalkeeper, Matthias Dingeland, I think, he's the best keeper in the top 3 as well. So individually, they do have some talent, but I'm just looking at the actual squad depth overall. They've not really added anyone new. Emil Kornvik's coming from Citadella, a Danish player midfield. He might be useful, but not a lot else. Although they did do quite a bit of business in the summer. So yeah, they're going to be up there, no doubt about it. They're going to be dominant at home and everything like that, and they're well coached. But I just think you look at Molde and Glimt, there's the teams that have got a little bit of extra quality and class, and they've certainly got a lot more depth. Brann are in Europe as well, by the way, and I expect them to certainly reach the final qualifying round of Conference League. So that is an area they might get distracted in the summer. That was where they dropped points last season, Jonathan, as well, around that period. So it's not like they've got a whole clean slate ahead of them where they can focus entirely on Eliteserien.
Yeah, and an interesting thing about Brann, and we'll have a little talk about transfers in a second as well. According to Transfermarkt, they've actually made the lowest declared amount of money of any team in Eliteserien. Only 13,000 euros, according to Transfermarkt, they've made in sales this winter, which I find incredible. Of course, there's a few teams like, as an example, Fredrikstad, for example, where they haven't declared certain sales, but they've got a few undisclosed fees. KFUM Oslo as well, who we'll talk about later, got a couple of undisclosed fees. So can't say 100% for certainty that they're the lowest, but in terms of declared transfers fees, they made the lowest income of any team. Does that imply that they just wanted to keep their squad settled? Does that imply maybe they've got a bit of a lack of maybe high class players that appeal, or is it indicated that they've been able to keep their best players? And also, let's look at we've had quite a few in terms of season predictions. We've asked a few people on the Nordic Football Twitter to give their predictions for top goal scorers. Even a few of them have got Bård Finner. How big is it the fact that they've kept him as well?
Yeah, they did sell 2 players last summer, David Moller-Wolf and Matthias Rasmussen, for a combined 4 million euros, I do believe. So that,
yeah, I'm just referring to winter. I'm just referring to
the winter. Yeah.
Winter.
Yeah. They've kept. It's just for some reason I think Arik Hornen likes a small squad. Now some managers, are in that preference. I'm just not sure. Finner is the MVP of the whole league, really, in terms of for his club. If he went down injured, they're basically screwed. They're massively screwed because they rely so much on him for goals, assists, influence. I just don't see how. A bit like, I suppose Pellegrino was a bit like that for Glimt at times. But I look at the other teams and they could probably cope if they lost a key man. If they lost Finner, it's a huge blow. It would be a huge, huge blow, or Saltvet, something like that. So that always concerns me a bit. But yeah, he may well be the top scorer because he just gets in so many positions. And this is a team that's on the front foot, pressing, creates opportunities. They're a good watch, Brann. And you know what? If it was a season where, Glimt and Molde weren't that good, they could win the league. They're just a bit unfortunate that they're in a position where, there's two really, really strong teams that are doing really well in Norwegian football at this point in time. But they'll give it absolutely everything. It would be interesting if they were still in the mixer entering the autumn, say, to win the league, because you can't rule out Brann. They'll be absolutely chomping at the bit to try and get there. But yeah, there is a lot on board Finnish shoulders.
One key man then, one maybe young player to watch, and one key departure. Mind you, it doesn't seem like there's too many major departures, is there, over the winter?
No, the big departure was probably, as I say, Rasmussen last summer, really. I'm going to say, right, Finner's obvious, but I think Nicolas Castro needs to have a big season for Brann. We often talked about him on this podcast, how he used to absolutely rip it up in Obos League again, and we expected a lot of him in the top level. He's 28 years old now, and again, he's on the treatment table too much for my liking, but he's a fantastic technical player. I think if he can have a big season, that is an area where they could gain something from, someone that maybe didn't contribute as much last season as he could have. So I'm going to say him. And what was the other goal? A young player to watch out for might be a signing from Kongs Vinja for $500,000. Martin Helland. Looks like he can play on fullback either side. So he'll be sort of the backup to Saltvet, perhaps. But I've heard that he's quite a talent worth looking out for.
Thank you very much, Mr. Steve Wyss. That concludes the top three. So we got Brann in third, according to Meatman Soccer. We got Molde second and Bodø Glimt champions. Let's move further down the table now. And your team in fourth place, Steve, is Viking. Now, last season, they were sort of okay, finished fourth as well. So you're predicting them to sort of hold the fort here, Steve. Let's have a little conversation about Viking. What's been going on there?
Yeah, I think we all kind of felt a bit sorry for them last season, apart from Brann fans, maybe, that they, for a long time, they were in the mixer for the title. I think they won, was it 12 games in a row at one point or something ridiculous like that, but they finished poorly and didn't even qualify for Europe. The final nail in the coffin was when Molde won the Norwegian Cup at the expense of Bodø Glimt. So that knocked them out of any European football this summer, which might help them because I think the last time they were in Europe, they certainly lost points in the league because of it. They wouldn't have been able to cope. They've done well, these two joint managers, Beate Lunde-Arsheim and Morten Jensen. You know me, I'm always a little bit dubious about managerial duos. There's three teams that have got that in Eliteserien this year, and Viking, these are the most sort of known duo because they've been together for a while now. And they've had two really good seasons and one sort of poor season. So they certainly deserve the opportunity to keep going here. Viking, ultimately, they've got good players on their squad, and I think the quality levels is what puts them in fourth place for me. All across the board, really, they've got. I mean, let's just start in defence, where if they can get Gianni Stensnes fit, and that is a big if because he needs to be wrapping cotton wool, then he's a really top level defender. Bjørsol, Vervatner as well, are not bad. In midfield, Joe Bell's back at the club, of course. Again, another player that can get him playing like he was in his first spell here. He's like a Rolls Royce of a player in that position. And, the likes of, Sondre Auckland. They've got two Aucklands, actually, Vettel Auckland and Sondre Auckland. The midfielder, Sondre, I think, could have a developing year. And then they've got weapons in attack, like big weapons. Lars-Jørgen Salvesen, power horse, target man. Zlatko Tripic, we know he's got goals and assists in him. Nick D'Agostino's back now after finishing last season on the injury list. They've signed Peter Christiansen from Sonja Siske. 600,000. 2-footed striker from what I've been hearing. So they've got weapons. Even youngster Edwin Osbro, maybe he didn't actually develop last year as we thought he might. Yeah, you look at their squad on paper and you're thinking they can't be outside the top 6. You know what I mean, Jonathan? So that's why I'm putting them in 4th place. It's asking a bit too much to title challenge. They could maybe challenge for a medal if someone like Brann did have a down year. But, they just look like solid top 6 material to me.
Talk to us about Trippic, because, he's a key man last season and they've kept him. Was there any rumours he might leave?
Always rumours with Trippic, but, you got to remember now he's 31. And, where do you go at that age for a big payday? Probably like the Middle East or America. So that's always a possibility. The big problem for me is Trippic. He's a bit like Bård Finner in a way. He's the heartbeat of the team. And when he's not available, or there always seems to be a period in the season when he's sort of playing hurt. Do you know what I mean? And we used to work at Football Radar, and they had a system where a player could be ranked like injury light or injury medium, if you remember, Jonathan. Good old days, weren't they? And we always had some players who were like injury light for like the whole season or half a season. They always played hurt. Zlatko Trippic is one of those players. Brilliant technically and, inspirational sort of captain. So he's obviously their MVP, but they do have other I think their attacking options are, if he missed matches, they do have others who can step up, which that encourages me, so it's not as bad as it used to be where, perhaps they lacked the depth. I think they've got a bit more depth now in that area. So, that will help them out. Quite an attacking team, well supported, of course, at home. The crowd can make a big difference. And I think we've got to say well coached by this managerial duo in the last 2 or 3 years. So, I'm expecting them to have a pretty strong campaign.
Okay, final comments on Viking then. They're quite a well-supported club as well, aren't they, we should say. What are your thoughts in terms of player to watch, young player maybe, and any key departures?
There have been 2 key departures. Nicholas Sandberg, Marcus Solbakken is a key loss. I think he was in my player of the season, team of the season last year, wasn't he, in the D mid spot? And he's one of them players that everyone kind of forgets about a little bit, but he held the glue together quite well. But Joe Bell can come in again and after a whole off season and perhaps replace him. So I'm not as concerned there. David Bracolo for me was a top defender last year, and when he got injured, they fell apart a bit at the back. So that's a big loss. But they've kind of done without him for the last 10 games anyway. So there was a period of adaptation there. A young player to watch might be Edwin Uspo again, but I do like this Vettel Auckland left back. But I think he can play in a lot of other different positions. 19-year-old, he could be worth keeping an eye on. From a fantasy perspective, they're always a team where a lot of their players are a bit overpriced, Jonathan. Like Trippic, for example, 10.5 million. It's quite a lot of money, isn't it, in fantasy terms? So they don't always have that many players picked in terms of fantasy.
So maybe not a fancy one to keep an eye out for. We will be dropping the fantasy code for the Nordic Football Podcast League. Let's see who can challenge for the title this year. We'll be dropping that after the break. But in the meantime, Steve, that is Viking in 4th. Let's move on to 5th, and a team who might challenge for sort of a European spot, but you don't expect them to challenge for the title this season, and that is Lillestrøm.
Yeah, and I think with Lillestrøm, if we look at them last season, I think they finished a disappointing, was it 8th or 9th, something like that. Certainly their points tally was only 43. And I think they'll want to try and get up towards the 50-point mark again. And there's no reason why they can't, because it's a decent squad. I think we'll let them off a little bit last summer because their season was rocked by Gaia Bakker leaving them mid-season to their arch rivals. I mean, we talk about the effect that had for Vålerenga. They ended up getting relegated. But there's no doubt it unsettled Lillestrøm as well. It just would do. And they ended up with Eirik Bakker, former Leeds man, sort of as caretaker for the rest of the season. And they've got a brand new appointment for this term. And they've got hold of a Swedish man called Andreas Georgsson, former Malmo and Arsenal coach. I think he was on the Southampton books as well. This is his first head coach role, but he does have a decent reputation. Very clever man. I think he was involved in the set pieces at Arsenal, I do believe. Known for his organisation and discipline. So I think he will have them firing and well drilled. And he inherits a decent squad with an abundance of quality in it, led up from, of course, by the evergreen Thomas Lennart-Olsen, but there's several youngsters as well, decent experienced players across the board. And sometimes I look at this squad and I'm like, do you know what? If things actually go really well for them, they could be a dark horse for a medal. So again, I see them as a really solid top 6 side, and I'm predicting them 5th.
Yeah, I mean, last season was a massive, probably the story of the season, wasn't it? There, how have they sort of recovered from all that, and how's that impacted them? And also one thing with Lillestrøm, they seem to do quite a good transfer business, don't they? Let's have a little talk about the ins and outs that they've had, because they're always quite an interesting side from that point of view.
Yeah, Akor Adams was obviously a big hit for them, and then they sold him to Montpellier in the summer. And let's not forget that was a big loss as well. You suddenly go from having perhaps the best striker in the league to he's not on your books anymore. So in terms of signings, I like what they've done. They've brought in Eric Kitolano from Molde, and a really versatile player, 400,000. I think it's a great deal because he can play anywhere on the field, midfield or attack. Erling Knudsen from Molde as well on a free transfer. He starts the season injured, but he's experienced now. He can play anywhere on that right-hand side. So a good mixture there. They've delved into the African market in recent years. Uber Charles, I think, was on my 10 to watch list last season. Didn't really get enough game time, but he could maybe be a man in the middle to watch out this year. They've also signed another Nigerian from FC One Rocket, called, brilliant name, F.A. Lucky. Love that name. Again, I've heard some good things about him, so he might go well. And August Carlin from Malmo, a youngster who could potentially develop. So good signings across the board. Sander Foss from Sandefjord on a free. That's a really good signing. The captain of Sandefjord, they managed to get on their books for nothing this year. So you're right, they have done well in the transfer market.
Yeah, and just on Georgsen, obviously, you mentioned it's his first full-time role. I mean, he was in a sort of coaching, his first coaching role. It was his first coaching role was at Malmo, of course, but that was a sort of caretaker position, really. So this is his full-time, I guess, debut. It'd be interesting because it didn't really quite work out at Malmo, and there was a bit of a period of flux for the managers there after Jon Dahl Tomasson's departure. So I feel like for Lillestrøm fans, there's a bit of, it's hard to judge him on that stint. But what's kind of been the reaction to his appointment, and what would you expect from him? I mean, I don't know if he listens to this podcast, but we've been trying to get him on the show for about 5 years. So I don't think maybe we'll have some luck now he's in Norway, but Malmo are obviously quite guarded about who they let on podcasts and things like that. But what can we kind of expect? I mean, I suppose one thing, having been a set piece specialist, you'd expect them to maybe be pretty good at corners and free kicks.
Well, yes. I mean, you would expect that, Jonathan. He inherits a team which there's some big bodies here. Like Thomas Lennart-Olsen is an absolutely lethal from corners. Ruben Gabrielsen. I haven't even talked about him. I think he's a top quality centre back. He'd be one of the best in the league. So that's an area where they may well get quite a strong edge. And they've got the technical players to take the free kicks as well. Yerman Assen is a fantastic sort of heartbeat quarterback of the team, whatever you want to call him. So there's quality here. And a player I do want to talk about, Henrik Skogvold, I think could break out this year in anywhere in attack. Really, sounds like he's got goals in him. It looks like Georgsen's going to go with a 4-3-3, but I do know that there's a few fans that think that they are better with 3 at the back. So whether that might change in time, they could easily go 3-5-2 or 3-4-3 here. So I think that's a situation to look at. I think Georgsen will go well, and we nearly got him on the podcast, didn't we, a few years ago? Maybe this year we could get him on. Get off to a good start, and he'll be raring to go.
Yeah, good luck to them. And any final comments on this? I know we talked about key departure. You've talked about kind of the sort of players to watch there, Steve. Is there any outsiders that you might maybe put in your fantasy team, for example? Any sort of maybe young talents that should keep an eye out for?
Well, Skogvold's the one that everyone's kind of talking about, and it's in fantasy because he's quite cheap at 6.5 million. He's one of them players that will probably end up about, a bit like Cole Palmer in fantasy Premier League this year, probably end up about 30% owned eventually, just because of his price. And if he ends up like scoring goals, getting regular minutes, so he's probably the one there. Big losses, none really of significance over the winter. Akor Adams was the main departure. They lost Eskil Eder to IE in Sweden. Decent sort of wide fullback, wingback, but I wouldn't call him key. And they got money for him as well. Vettel Sharvik went to Tromsø for 500,000, but he wasn't really getting enough minutes at Lillestrøm. So, and I think, again, the reason that those two players might have gone is because of this switch from a system which was 3 at the back. I think Jorgensen prefers 4-3-3, as a lot of... I feel Jorgensen's quite a technical coach, and a lot of technical coaches do prefer that, don't they?
They do indeed. So fantastic stuff, Steve. That is Lillestrøm in 5th. Now let's move on. And you've got a team who was bang on mid-table last season, but you've predicted them to have a little bit of a better season this time around, climbing up a few places. Take it away, Steve. Who have you got in 6th?
Oh, here we go again, Sarpsborg. And like I swear down, this script just doesn't change any season in terms of the transfers. Like, is there a club that I've never known a club with such a high player turnover each winter than Sarpsborg? There's just so many come in the door and so many exit the door. Ultimately, I'm predicting them 6th place because I think actually on the field, when all's said and done, they'll be quite similar to last season. And I think they would have finished. I think they lost their last 3. And if they had maybe got some points out of those, they probably would have finished about 6th. So, in terms of the expected points table, they were right up there in the top 6 last year. And I think we'll see something similar. Stefan Bilborn, very exciting manager. Generally plays it on the front foot, risk taker. But I think we saw signs last year where he did tone it down a little bit on occasion. And I think he's learned his lessons from the previous season where at one point they were in relegation trouble. They're a tough side to analyse because of the player turnover, really. But I just think, based on what we've seen of this manager over the last 2 years, based on what I think is decent enough quality, that they certainly look a solid bet for the top half, a top 8 team. And I'm putting them in 6th because I just think they maybe edge a few of the teams that we're going to talk about soon.
Now, the interesting thing is we haven't mentioned a certain club yet who some might argue is the biggest in Norway. So we might come to them shortly. But what is it that makes you think Sarpsborg would finish above that team who I won't mention yet? But, what is it that makes you think they'll be challenging with so much turnover? Is it maybe the manager? Is it the fans? Is it the style of play? Like what is it that gives you that feeling that they'll climb up the league?
Yeah, I'm not massively confident about this because things could go wrong for Sarpsborg. We saw them have a horror run 2 years ago, mid-season, where they lost them like 6 or 7 games in a row, and you wonder where the next point was coming from. It's an aggressive system which demands a lot of the players. Mistakes can happen at the back, and that he's living life close to the edge, really, Stefan Bilborn at times. But why do I think, though, that they've got, I think there's a bit more stability here, 3rd season with the same coach. Let's look across some of the players. Joe Inge Birgit, and I say this with gritted teeth, as he's not been my favourite player down the years, has he? If they can keep him fit, he's 33. They've got a fantastic sort of fox in the box, like Poacher. He knows where the goal is. And, there's an art to that at this level, isn't there? So if he stays fit, you're probably getting 10 to 15 goals out of him in this system, which is a massive bonus. They've brought in some youngsters, some 2 or 3 that I really do like the look of. I'll talk about them soon. And then you've got your likes of, in midfield, Jeppe Andersen, Simon Tibbling, pretty key players who will go well. And at the back, reliable performers like your Magna Odegaards. I thought Franklin Tebo Uchenna had a good finish to last season. So he's a powerful centre-back for them. The goalkeeper situation is a little bit of a merry-go-round. We've got Marko Ilic on loan from Colorado until mid-July. Anders Christensen waking in the wings as well. But yeah, overall, I mean, I'll talk about some of these young signings now, but yeah, it's just for me more. Despite the player turnover, there's a more feeling of sort of settlement in the squad, and less expectations, of course, and pressure.
Yeah, I mean, from a Swedish point of view, there's one player that interests me in terms of their incomings, Aymar Sher. He is a former Hammarby player, Iraq international, I believe, or he played Sweden under 21s as well, but I think he's Iraqi descent. Never really, he was always touted as a really top young talent, but I never really rated what I saw of him. But he got a big move to Spezia without playing a huge amount of games for Hammarby, as always is often the case with that club. And I think they signed him for about 1.5 million euros on a 5-year deal in 2021 or so. But it didn't really work out for him there. I think he made one league appearance, if that, a couple of league appearances, and then went to Groningen on loan. And then his contract was terminated 2 years later. So he's one who could be someone to keep an eye out for. Steve Sher there. I don't know what your thoughts are on him, but it sounds like, I know obviously with the Swedish contingent there, because of Billborn, who is of course a former Hammarby manager, they're always going to be a team who are fairly attacking and quite high scoring, aren't they? Billborn is definitely known for that. But yeah, it's an interesting one. Have you got any final comments on Sarpsborg? I don't know if you'd agree with what I said there, or have you got any other final observations?
I like the transfer dealings. They brought in Aymar Sher, like you said, Sondre Osheta from Sogndal, and they've paid nearly £800,000 for him. That's quite a lot for a team like Sarpsborg. Although they did get a big income last year from Christopher Bonsuba, former 10 to watch, who I think one of the Belgian clubs spent nearly 4 million on him. But Osheta, I've heard a lot of good things about him, inside forward on the left wing. So they've brought in some good youngsters, but they've also brought in some experienced players like Joe de Birgit last season. Stefan Johansson, former QPR, Fulham, West Brom. He can sit in that sort of midfield area and, use his intelligence wisely, bit of a quarterback again. So a good mix of youth and experience, I would say. They've lost, they have lost some players as well. No doubt about it, like Mikkel Maigard, Victor Torp went to Coventry. So, and Raman Pascal Lundqvist as well. So they're a club that are used to that down the years. I would like to see them. I think probably the area I'm a little bit worried about is fullback, because Saltvet was a big loss to them last summer. Anders Him there's a lot on him at left back this year, I think. No pun intended. That's the area that I think they need some players to perhaps step up, but it could happen.
Yeah, and they're often known as a springboard for Africa talent as well. I mean, I'm just looking on Wikipedia, Stephen. I think it seems like, have they never won anything in their history? I'm trying to look at their honours page and I can't see any.
I don't know. Daniel Job, by the way, that's another Nigerian loanee from a place called Future PA. 18-year-old. I mean, if he does a job for them, I think they'll be signing him permanently, won't they?
I don't know if he's related to Joseph Desiree Job, former Middlesbrough. You might remember him, Steve. But I can't see any honours for this club, so I'm assuming
they must have won something somewhere.
They're the 16th largest municipality in Norway, according to Wikipedia, but I cannot see any honours. So, I don't know if that's an oversight by Wikipedia or just the fact that they've never won anything. A quick final comment on Torp, Steve. What are your thoughts on him for maybe Coventry fans? I mean, that's a big fee they've paid.
Yeah, I think they got him at the right age. Such a versatile player. Do you know what I mean? And I think versatility is underrated in football now. There's so many top players that just seem to be so unique and can only play in one position. But, Torp, I mean, you could put him anywhere in midfield, really, or attack, and he could do a job. And that's Sarpsborg for you. They'll find someone like Bonsuba, for example, who's only with them for 6 months, and he's out of the door for 4 million. So they are a real springboard club, for talent like this. Probably helped by a manager that's quite offensive-minded,
Yeah, brilliant stuff. That's Sarpsborg then. You have them in 6th place, a jump of 2 places from last season. Let's move on to your team in 7th place, Steve. I do want to ask you after break a little bit about VAR actually as well in Norway. And I do also want to sort of touch on, young players to watch and that kind of thing. Sarpsborg there, there's been some interesting movements of them over the years. Always a team who've sort of had good talent. But it's the mighty Rosenborg you've got in 7th. And when we asked on Twitter, we asked some of our listeners at Nordic Football, tweet us who you think will go up. Sorry, not go up, but who will win the league, who will be sort of the top goal scorer of the league, and who will be relegated. I don't know if this is a bit of tongue-in-cheek, Steve, but we've had a couple of people predicting Rosenborg to get relegated. Now, I don't know if that's just tongue-in-cheek or if they're being serious, or sometimes one can be an anomaly, Steve. But we've seen a few. I mean, just looking now, Auto Reclose FPL's got Christiansund and Rosenborg to go down. Tom Bird Football at Tom Bird Football. Tom Bird, he's got KFUM Oslo and Rosenborg to go down. Is this a bit tongue in cheek, or what's going on?
Well, I was involved on Monday in a Twitter Spaces with Andy Martin, a fantasy space. You might have caught some of it, Jonathan. I don't know. And when we started talking about Rosenborg, he asked me for a prediction about them, and I said I think they'll get relegated. And then I was joking, but I think Andy wasn't too shocked that I actually said that. So there's something going around, isn't there? I think they're the hardest team by far to predict this season. I think their ceiling is probably 4th, but their cellar could be the playoff game, maybe, if things go really bad. And I've got them in 7th place because I think the reason people are saying that they might, possibly be relegated is because we've had some big teams go down in, say, the last 5 or 6 years. We look at clubs that have gone down. Brann went down. Vålerenga have just gone down. Viking went down not that many years ago. So everyone's kind of thinking, we need to find a big club that's going to go down. Rosenborg look the best answer because they've been an absolute basket case for 2 or 3 seasons. I think that's a bit of an overreaction, though, Jonathan. We've got to stay level-headed here and grounded. Just look at the squad. Look at the quality in the squad. Look at the history of the club as well. I know history doesn't always mean everything, but they're well supported. And, we'll talk about the new manager soon as well. I've got them in 7th. I honestly don't really have much confidence in that prediction, but there's enough in this squad that they shouldn't really get involved in any trouble.
Shouldn't get involved in any trouble, fair enough. But I think we also have to admit, Steve, that when it comes to a point where you and a veteran of more than a decade in this game are predicting the biggest team. I mean, the biggest team in Norway. Let's be honest, in terms of history, titles won, that kind of thing. This is a club who have won multiple league titles. When you're predicting them to come 7th, and it's not even really like a big shock. I mean, that is like predicting Bayern Munich to finish 7th. It's like predicting Manchester United to finish 7th, which, these days, I mean, maybe you might do that, but, it's a massive thing, Steve, isn't it? I think personally, and we've talked about them a lot last season in terms of, where do they go? What exactly is their direction? I mean, we had Sean Constable on. If you've not listened to our season review podcast you can listen to it a few episodes ago, beginning of this year. I mean, Sean Constable had some damning words about Rosenborg in that podcast and the way they're kind of run at times, not necessarily pointing any names, but when you've got a team, Steve, like this that have won 26 Eliteserians, they haven't won the league since 2018. They haven't even finished 2nd since 2014. I don't believe, anyway, according to Wikipedia. It's a bit of a damning indictment on the club, wouldn't you say, Steve? I mean, I was expecting you to maybe go away. Maybe this would be the year where they really sort of like reviewed things, had a long, hard look at themselves, quote unquote, after finishing 9th last year. And you'd think to yourselves, right, they would have the resources to come back. Does this suggest that either they don't have the resources or that they don't have the management skills to make the good enough recruitment, strong enough recruitment to be able to sort of challenge Glimt and Molde? What exactly is going on here? Because for me, it feels like a big thing to even be saying they'll finish 7th.
I think you just mentioned it there. I think the best comparison for Rosenborg is Manchester United. Had sort of a long period of dominance under a very good manager. Or in Rosenborg's cases, it was sort of multiple managers. And then they just hired the wrong guy it at the wrong time in Eirik Horneland, who, a bit like David Moyes, actually, is not a bad manager by any means, and they've proven since they left Rosenborg that it's absolutely fine. But it wasn't the right appointment for them at the right time. And since then, they've never been able to recover. And it's also the other problem is that other clubs like Glimt and Molde have proven themselves to be so well run that they've exposed how badly Rosenborg have been run. And down the years, I think they maybe got away with it because they were so big. They could maybe buy their best players. They would have the biggest pulling power, like bringing in someone like Lord Bentner, for example. And yeah, now they're in a situation where those frailties are very much come to the fore. Those gremlins have surfaced. And we're in a position where pretty much everyone's kind of predicting them just to finish mid-table, or the very highest I think I've seen them predicted is like 4th. Don't think anyone expects them to get a medal. There's even some people out there who think they could do a Vålerenga and just go down. That's how we've come to this situation, really. I think just a combination of poor hires, poor transfer dealings, and poor direction from the club from those above. But there are positives. I mean, ask me something positive about Rosenborg, Jonathan, because I don't want to be the doom and gloom merchant for this club at all. There are some positives, and they might surprise us.
Okay, you don't want to be a doom and gloom merchant, but I mean, predicting them 7th is doom and gloom in itself, right? They're supposed to be a massive club. I mean, if you're predicting Manchester United finish 7th in the Premier League, generally speaking, you'd have TalkSport, people like that would be raging about it and saying it's not good enough and bashing their, Roy Keane bashing his hand on the table saying this is Manchester United we're talking about here. So from Rosenborg's point of view, we will get to the positives, of course, but it's not really good enough to be predicting them 7th. I mean, I actually remember, Steve, last season you predicted them 4th, and that was a big thing. I remember we had a big discussion about them being 4th. It was like, what's going on here then? Now it's 7th. A bit of a catastrophic year last year, finishing 9th. But yeah, let us do that. Let's look at the positives. I mean, one thing for me, if I'm looking at positives, I would say, before I let you get into it, obviously my background is more in player talent ID and young talents and that kind of thing, of course, for those who don't know about me or for those who don't know the background of the show and that kind of thing. But for those who have listened to one of our 10 to watches, you'll see, usually focus on the young talents. And there's one player that I really fell in love with watching in some of the European games Rosenborg had last season. Of course, they won't have in Europe this season, but it's Sverre Nipan, Steve, the 17-year-old there. I mean, is he the big shining light of kind of Rosenborg, football club? Is he kind of the kid who's going to kind of lead the way here? You know what I mean? Talk to us about him, and if it's not him, then what would you say are the positives that you just mentioned?
Yes, Sverre Nipan is the big positive of the club. 17-year-old wonder kid who everyone kind of knows about him because he's not just popped up in real life with great stuff. I think he's really becomes like a top player in the likes of Football Manager and probably FIFA as well. I don't know. Brilliant youngster, 2-footed, can play anywhere in midfield really. Even been playing up front in some of the pre-season friendly games. So, I think Rosenborg fans are worried though that how long can they keep him? Will they develop him properly? Because I think part of me was thinking, what if Nipan was coming through the Bodø Glimt Academy or the Molde system? Would he be even better there? I don't know. They do have a hell of a weapon there with Nipan, but how long can they hold on to him for? Dubbed the new Martin Odegaard. He might not be on these shores for too much longer. So look, he's a positive though. If they can keep him for the whole season, someone like that who's come through the whole system can drive them. A possible positive might be the manager, Alfred Johansson, 33 years old. That's remarkably young. He might be the youngest manager in the league, actually. I need to do some research into that. It's his first head coach role. He's come through the FC Copenhagen youth systems, under 14, under 17, under 19s. He's going to be playing 4-3-3. Look, he might be an absolute stroke of genius. They've gone something different here rather than some of these old dinosaurs, which Sean Constable talked about on one of the podcasts last year. They've gone really young. Is it too raw for him? Do they need someone more experienced? I don't know. Johansson might prove to be brilliant, or he might prove to be a bust. But let's try and be positive and say that he's a good one for them. They've got some other young players, such as Hakon Rosten at the back. Magnus Holzer in attack could be worth. I like Jaden Nelson, the Canadian. And, there's some experienced talent as well. So it might not all be that bad, but, there's they just feel like a club in decline. When the atmosphere is not good, there's constant spotlight pressure on the players from the fans. That's not a good environment to play football in. And also the injury problem, Jonathan. This club have had a huge injury situation the last sort of 3-4 years. That can't be a fluke. Like, what is going on behind the scenes there? Is it a physio department problem? Is it a training problem where they're maybe doing on the wrong? Remember when Newcastle had those a couple of years where everyone was getting injured because of the training pitch? Is that happening here? There's always at least 5 or 6 players out. So, yeah, that's why there's sort of negativity around. And, apart from Nipan, they do kind of like an absolute star, don't they? So that's why I think I'm putting them in my predicted 7th.
Yeah, and just for those who don't know, Alfred Johansson obviously joined the start of the year. He's a pro licensed coach from Sweden, 33 years old, as you've just mentioned. He signed a contract for the next 3 seasons, basically, down to the end of 2026. And his background is kind of, he's been in the youth teams at FC Copenhagen. He was AOK, or EKO's under-17 manager for a year. He's also been Djurgården's academy manager a decade or so ago. So he's been around the block in sort of Denmark and Sweden. But of course, this is his first sort of major coaching role, I believe, at a top club anyway, certainly. And they've obviously seen enough in him to give him a lot of confidence in there and faith in him. Steve, just let's wrap it up. One to watch, maybe for your fantasy team. One, the key departure, and maybe we'll leave it at those 2.
Yeah, I think obviously Nipan is one to watch, and also he's quite cheap in fantasy, so a lot of people are considering, whether to add him there. But I'm going to say Jaden Nelson. I saw bits of him last season. The Canadian attacker can play anywhere there. Attacking midfield, winger, striker. I think he's got something about him. If he can get on a consistent run, he could be one to watch. And departure, they've not really lost anyone of significance, but I will say Andre Hansen, the goalkeeper, not necessarily because of performance, because he hasn't been that great in the last year or two, but just someone who's won a lot of the trophies with them in the past, big influence in the dressing room, perhaps. That could be a blow to lose him from that capacity. But it might be a good thing that they move on from him as well.
Yeah, and just interestingly, on a final note there, they've got Johansson actually has as his assistant head coach. You might have heard of him. You might remember him, Steve. Alexander Tete, the former Norwich City, and was he at Rennes?
Former Rennes, former Rosenborg, obviously. Yeah, I mean, I quite like that he knows the club.
Yeah, so good luck to him. And they've also got, I think, Jordi Gonzalez Asnar there. Mikael Dawson, obviously their sports leader. I always remember him from Championship Manager, a bit of a versatile player himself. Let's move on. In 8th place before we take a break. Strømsgodset, Steve, you've got bang on mid-table after, a sort of middling finish last season as well, finished 7th.
Yeah, another really tough team to predict, actually, because I was, again, this space is the thing I did with Andy Martin actually predicted them to go down, which was an interesting one. He thinks they don't know their own identity. And I kind of know where he's coming from, because I can't make head or tail of Godset at times. Jürgen Isnes came in as the manager last season, and after a long spell at KFUM Oslo, and did really well there. And he seemed to have a distinct style at Oslo where there were, it was kind of basketball games, really, end to end, full of goals and all that. But at Godset, the goals tally has come down quite a lot. He's used this 3-4-3 system. And I don't know whether it probably is because he's inherited better players at Godset. He's got better defensive players there than he ever had in his whole coaching career. And at times they were really difficult to break down. And there were moments in the season where Isnes showed his tactical nous, but he wasn't consistent enough. It only really became consistent, I think, towards the back end of last season, where they did. There's always a team that finishes well, isn't there? And it was them last year. I think if they hadn't finished well, they're looking at a lower end sort of table finish. No team had more under 2.5 goal matches, I'm talking betting talk here, than Godset. 19 out of 30 games finished under 2.5 goals. And I mean, that's crazy, really. That's really low for Eliteserien level. So I think we've seen ultimately that the big strength of the team was defence. And I think that's why I'm putting them in the top 8, because I think they're really well coached, a solid backbone to them, and just their unpredictable nature. I wouldn't fancy facing them if I was like an opposition manager, because I wouldn't really know what version of them is going to show up. But you know that you're always going to be in the sort of a gritty, tough game. And I think they're the sort of team that could beat anyone on the day, maybe could lose to anyone on the day as well. And combine that with typically an historical home fortress, then I think they'll be fine in mid-table.
Fantastic stuff, Stephen. And let's look at the ins and outs of Godset. I mean, not a huge amount of transfer business, maybe, compared to some other teams. I think obviously Elias Melkersen is the big one, 1.2 million euros according to Transfermarkt. It looks like they've paid for him. But who are the big sort of incomings and outgoings from your point of view? They actually bought quite a few players. I mean, they've bought in a keeper. They've bought in a centre back from Sandefjord as well. So do you want to go into the sort of incomings and outgoings and how that might affect the balance of the squad?
Yeah, it's a straightforward keeper swap. Villar Mira goes and Per Christian Braithwaite comes in. Former Odd player, former Haugesund as well, and Djurgården. It just didn't work out for him at Djurgården, did it? Whether that was because the competition he faced there was better than expected, I'm not sure. But he could easily rebound and have a strong season. In attack, they lost Jonathan Brooms last summer, of course. And I think Melkersen, there's a lot on his shoulders. It's a permanent move now. He was on loan back end of last season there. I'm not 100% convinced by him. 21 years old, though, so he could easily develop and hit the ground running. They do need some goals from him, let's be honest. He's the main striker. If he went down, they're looking at like Menhert or Eklund to get goals. Erik Ulland Andersen is a useful player. Can play anywhere in that attack. They've lost Stenovic to Molde, which I think is a bit of a loss. He's such a versatile player. A lot riding on the shoulders of Herman Stengel in midfield, who's a technical talisman. But they do have some youngsters who I think are going to step up. Marco Faragi, I've pronounced that wrong. I know I have. I never get that one right. Emmanuel Danso and Krasnik Krasniki, the Kosovan, are well worth watching out for, who could step up. So, I mean, also, signed Jesper Toya from Sandefjord, a really towering centre-back. And I mean, they've got Gustav Valsvik, who is often a go-to fantasy option for people because he scores goals. I mean, they've got some really good defenders, like solid defenders. Fredrik Christiansen Dahl, Logie Thomason's going to be left wing back. They've brought in Daddy Gay from Tromsø as a loan until the summer. Just physical brutes at the back. I wouldn't fancy facing this team defensively, mate, because I just feel like you're going to be in a battle, with Godset. Like they've got it's like facing like a Big Sam sort of physical side, but even better coached, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, 100%. And in terms of Melkersen there, you talked about, and you said you're not maybe convinced by it. Did well at Ranheim, 19 goals in 29 appearances, but only 3 goals in 32 appearances for Hibs in Scotland. So he comes back maybe with his tail a little bit between his legs and maybe something to prove, but that can sometimes be a positive thing. The Norway under 21 international, and still, like I said, only 21 years old. That'll do, Steve, I think, for part 1. Well done in your 8 teams. So just to recap, you've got Godset, Strømsgodset in 8th place. You've got Rosenborg 7th, Sarpsborg 6th. You've got Lillestrøm 5th, Viking 4th. You've got Brann 3rd place this season, Molde 2nd, and Bodø Glimt to win the title. In part 2, we're going to talk about the bottom half of the table. We've got some new teams, some very exciting newcomers to the Eliteserien this season to talk about. And we'll also have a little bit of a chat about fantasy, what the league code is to join. Hopefully, if you've listened to part 1, you've got a few ideas for your team already. And we will be giving out the code and everything that you can expect from that part of things. Stay tuned, get yourself a cup of tea or get yourself an ice cream or whatever you want to refresh yourself. We'll be back after this short break. Welcome to part 2 of this season 2024 preview of the Eliteserien new season in Norway. My name is Jonathan Fadugba, which I didn't say at the beginning of the show, but hopefully you'll know that by now. And I'm joined by Steve Wyss. We've got through our first half of this table. Steve, who have you got in the second half of the table? Top of the bottom, essentially. You have a newly promoted side who we're quite excited to talk about. 9th place, Steve. Who have you got?
Yeah, and this is the team that have been steadily moving up my projections in the last sort of 3 or 4 days. I think I had them down initially in like 13th, and gradually they've wormed their way up, and finally I've got them in 9th, and that is Fredrikstad, who make a return to the top level of Norwegian football for the first time in, well, over a decade. I think the last time they were in Eliteserien, I was working with you at Football Radar, because I remember actually I filled in someone. I covered one of their games live. It wasn't my league at that stage to cover, but it's great to see Fredrikstad back. Historically a really big club, one of the biggest club stadiums in Norway, and they've fallen on lean times, but they are back where they will feel they belong. And I think they can give a pretty good account of themselves this season. That's why I'm putting them up as high as 9th.
A lot of excitement around Fredrikstad's return. They've had sort of long spells outside the top flight. I mean, I think they spent 20 years nearly outside it before the sort of early 2000s when they got promoted with back-to-back promotions around 2004. The history seems to be sort of up and down. I mean, in terms of honours, they're no Sarpsborg. They do have sort of some decent achievements in their time. They've won the Norwegian League 9 times. The most recent time was in 1961. And they also were runners-up in 2008. So they do have some recent history in terms of sort of high achievement in the top 2 positions. So I get the feeling, Steve, that a lot of people are happy to see them back.
I am very happy to see them back. I used to talk about them a lot, didn't I, when they weren't even in Eliteserien. It's funny you mentioned Sarpsborg. They do have a really, really big rivalry with them. They're from the south east of the country. And, you can add Moss to this triangle as well. But, Fredrikstad-Sogndal rivalry is quite a big one. I'm excited because they've been too long outside of the top flight. First, I think we're going to have to talk about how they got here. And in doing so, it kind of brings KFUM Oslo into the conversation a little bit, because Kristiansund won the Obos League, Fredrikstad won the Obos League again last season. KFUM was second, and Kristiansund won the playoff against Vålerenga, of course. Now, you wouldn't have predicted Fredrikstad and KFUM Oslo to be the 2 sides that got automatically promoted this time last year. You would have probably put them in maybe the top 6 or 7, sort of a playoff team. But they won the league, Fredrikstad, really because of their defensive record. It was it's kind of unusual for Obos, really, which is known for in the past for being such a high-scoring league. Fredrikstad and KFUM were so tight defensively. I mean, just 23 goals conceded for Fredrikstad in 30 matches, which is really abnormal. Apart from the years when, you say, Brann were in the league and dominated it completely, they won it because of a tight defence, and I think a lot comes down to the manager. The manager, they've got a Faroese manager in charge of them called Mikkel Thomassen, and this guy was the manager of K.A. Klasvik for knocking on the door of 7 seasons, won 3 titles there. I've just looked at his record, Jonathan. In the last 3 seasons that he has managed in domestic football leagues, he has lost 3 matches in 84 games.
That's incredible. That's incredible.
That's outrageous, including one invincible season with Klasvik where he won 25 and drew 2. So this man is not used to losing. He doesn't lose football games very often. Just twice last year with Fredrikstad, 10 draws. And I think he's clearly a very, very good coach. And there's even been whispers that, clubs might be looking at him this season. Like bigger clubs in the region. Even Glimt were mentioned. And his 3-5-2 system or 5-3-2 system looks like it's going to be really tricky to break down. There's There's positives to say about Fredrikstad. There's a few doubts as well, but I'll come to that in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, even from the rivalry point of view that you just mentioned there, sounds like we're going to have a few derbies. That always adds a bit of spice to the league, which is always good. And in terms of the managers you just mentioned there, I mean, yeah, this Thomason, is he the Mourinho of sort of the Faroe Islands? I don't know, but he clearly got a good reputation. And it's the first time that they'll be in the top flight for 11 years, Fredrikstad. Steve, they've I'm right in saying they were in third division not too long ago as well.
Yeah, they had 2 seasons down in that tier. So, yeah, they've suffered, the fans, and they'll be really pleased to be back.
Yeah, they've had a really good rise. What would you put there, I mean, apart from the manager? Let's look at some players and key men. What is it that makes you think they're going to come straight in and not even struggle with relegation at all?
Look, any team that comes up is vulnerable. But usually teams that come up from Obos, your normal sort of promotion teams, do it because they score a lot of goals and they just win shootouts. But it's Fredrikstad, I think, have got the defensive setup. What they've done is they've also been quite ruthless in the transfer market. Like, for example, the goalkeeper situation. Havar Jensen has been with Fredrikstad since his youth days, 28-year-old. So he's been with them through the falls and then the rises. But they've brought in Jonathan Fisher from a Danish club, Hobro, for $500,000, and he's going to be the starter. So I feel a little bit sorry for Havar Jensen. All his life he's kind of geared up for this, getting Fredrikstad back to the top flight. But they brought in Fisher, who looked an excellent prospect, by the way, a mountain of a keeper. But I think there's a ruthlessness for Fredrikstad. They look much better run than they used to be. They kind of used to be known for being a basket case club where things went wrong. There were too much of a circus, too much drama. But the seas are a lot more settled now. They got rid of Havard Asheim in midfield, who was, again, with them for life for 10 years. But he's gone. Obviously, they deemed him not good enough. And I think there will be this case where they'll get the best 11 they possibly can. They've got solid, experienced players that are coming in. Morten Bjørlo, Erlend Segberg. They've already got guys like Julius Magnusson, the captain, Icelandic, really strong physical player. Brando Hendrickson, Faroese, 56 caps there, all-rounder. They might lack for goals, and there's a lot on the shoulders of a guy called Jonas Bjartalid, 2-footed Faroese striker, and Oscar Arger as well, perhaps on loan from Rosenborg. They might lack for goals, but they're going to be hard to score on, Jonathan. That's why I think they'll stay up and naturally be really solid in mid-table. Always a question mark whether a team that's so good defensively in Obos can do it at the top level, but I see enough quality on paper, plus the manager, plus the tactical setup. They're not going to be particularly exciting to watch, but they're going to be tactically excellent and hard to break down.
Yeah, some ruthless moves there. And I think that, you mentioned up front, from my point of view, I've always liked Mai Traore, who it looks like they've signed on a permanent deal. He's got 8 goals in 48 appearances in the Eliteserien, which isn't amazing, but I remember in Sweden he was incredible for Vasalund. He got for 25 goals in 46 games in the third tier, and really looked good as well in Superettan for a spell. But it sounds like your sort of goals may be a concern for you from that point of view. Just give me a bit of a sense of what they'll bring to the league from a fan point of view. And, are they one of the most well-supported teams in the league? Are they can we expect much from that point of view? Are they going to add flavour? Like, just give us a little bit more on the derbies and what can we expect from the non-playing side?
Well, if we look at the actual stadium itself, you're talking nearly a 13,000 capacity stadium, which only the likes of Brann, Rosenborg, and Viking have a bigger capacity. So, they're going to bring the fans. I'm sure there'll be a few sellouts now they're back in the Eliteserien. They'll take quite a few with them as well. Do you like goal music, Jonathan, in football or not?
Absolutely hate it.
Well, they've got an incredible goal music twang, which goes on for a long, long time. Talking like 40-odd seconds it used to be. I think they might have shortened it now. I remember, I mentioned the game I covered when we worked at Football Radar there. And I think it was a playoff and they won it like 7-1. And this goal music is stuck in my head forever since that day because I heard it so often.
It's not Mr. Brightside. It's not Mr. Brightside by the Killers.
It's like a folk song. Like you've never heard anything like it. It's like a really original local track or whatever.
Oh, that could be good. I don't mind. Maybe
Fredrikstad it's called, and I'd never forget it all my life, mate. And thankfully they don't seem that high scoring. So for those who don't like the goal music, then I don't think it's going to annoy them that much this year. But there's a quirkiness about them. You know what I mean? They're quite a unique club, and they're going to ruffle a few feathers, I think, both on and off the field.
Great stuff. So you got them in 9th. We'll have a lot more to talk about them, I think, in weeks to come. Certainly sounds like they're going to be one to add a bit of spice to the league. In 10th place, Steve, you've gone for a team who you're expecting to have quite a big drop this season. I don't know if it's related to who we predicted as champions, but who have you got in 10th?
Yeah, and I hope I'm actually wrong. I really hope I'm wrong here, because I'm starting to feel a bit more sympathy towards this club now, and that is Tromsø. And I know there's a lot of Tromsø fans who listen to this podcast, and perhaps in recent years I've been accused of being more biased towards Bodø Glimt. It's not the case, really. It's because I think they've offered something different and new and exciting on the stage. It's not because I've been anti-Tromsø. I actually quite like the club down the years, and I'm really disappointed, actually, that they lost the manager to Glimt, as the assistant Gauter Helstrup, because I think he was building something here. And I think if they kept him and they've managed to keep all their best players over the last couple of years, then Tromsø could have built towards being a top 6 club regular. But I just think they're going to have to regress now. The manager was a big part of it. And, they brought in a dual managerial combination now who were assistants before. Jürgen Vick and Gard Holm. So I think we're going to see a similar system at Tromsø, 3 at the back, 3-5-2 sort of formation. And, whether this duo can replicate what Gauter Helstrup was doing, I'm not sure. They were big overachievers in terms of expected points last season. Their expected points was 43.8 and they obtained 61. Now that's just fluky, isn't it? Let's be honest. Now they're going to have to come down from that. Any team would, unless they got better on the field. But unfortunately, in terms of the squad quality, I think it's got slightly worse. So factor that in with the loss of the manager, loss of some key players, the overachievement last season. They have to come down the table for me. And it's just a question of how low. And I hope I'm wrong. I really hope they do better than 10th. I really do. Because I want to see them do well in the north of Norway there. But realistically, they've got to be sort of mid-table, I think.
Yeah, maybe a case of how low can he go for Tromsø, which rhymes. Transfer-wise, business, like you said, a lot. It's like Bodø Glimt are living in their nightmares, really, to be honest, in terms of that. Every transfer pretty much seems to be, I guess not all of them are to Glimt, but like you said, key men. Who have they got coming in that could maybe give them a bit of positivity?
Vettel Sharvik has come in from Lillestrøm for $500,000, and I quite like him. I think he's a good defender. Just probably not needed at Lillestrøm now. I wouldn't get the game time he wanted there. He could do well. They've signed another defender from Brann. Brann is known for being a hotbed of talent down the years, looking at Haaland of this world. 300,000 there for Tobias Gudal, who is a big lad, apparently, knocking on the door of like 6'8", I think. I've got that written down. I don't know how accurate that is. That's really tall, isn't it, if he is? Big lad anyway. Who else could do well for them? Marcus Jonsgaard is an interesting signing from Raufoss, from Obos. And a talent up front to watch out for, Senegalese striker Yoro Bar, who is another fairly big lad, I think, but quick is what I've got written down here. So look, that's positive. The goalkeeper's a positive one as well. Jakob Hårgaard, new contract till 2026. They overachieved a lot at the back last year, and he was one of the main reasons why. So that's a big positive as well. And, their home base. I do think it's a tough place to go. The Arctic Circle, it can be a sort of trek where some teams don't fancy it. So it's not all bad. And I really hope they have a good season. And because I really feel like they've had the heart ripped out of it, by Glimt. It would really annoy me if I was a fan. Like, seriously, it would. Like, you think you're making progress.
they start the season at home to Brann, which should be quite a big game, actually. That could be an exciting one just to sort of kick the year off. You've mentioned Bar. He's coming from Senegal. They've also sold a player, haven't they? Diouf for 1.7 million euros to Slavia Prague. That's a big departure.
Yeah, and Vesterland as well to Utrecht. That's a big loss for them. I think he was a really strong right wing back for them. Diouf, I don't think Diouf actually played that many games for them. So in terms of a loss on the field, I'm not entirely sure about that. They've not lost really anyone in midfield or attack, which is a positive. Vegaard early, and there's going to be quite a lot on his shoulders. Scored a lot of goals last year. Takes a very mean penalty. And Sakarias Opsal is a good technical midfielder. So look, they should have more than enough about them to be absolutely fine, really. But sometimes, when you have setbacks, it can affect clubs, can't it? So, probably a worst case scenario is that they get embroiled in a little bit of trouble at a certain stage, maybe. But I think they'll be all right. I really think so. I think 10th place. I maybe been a bit harsh there. I hope they do a little bit better.
And just finally, in terms of the managerial replacement, any concerns there, or have they sort of upgraded, or how are they going to be able to deal with that?
Well, Jurgen Vick is the name listed down. He's going to be in a dual managerial partnership with Gard Holm, and Vick, was the assistant. So, look, I think it should be kind of similar. You know the club really well, and I think it's important for Tromsø to get a manager that knows the area well. They're quite unique up there. It's almost its own country in the Arctic Circle. So, yeah, look, let's just see how they go for the first few weeks. And of course, it's a concern because it's a manager that's never been a head coach before. But, let's see.
Let's see is the cry from Meatman Soccer. He's full of penguins and he's full of predictions. That is Tromsø in 9th place. No, I'm looking at it. I'm looking at last season's predictions because I'm leading into my new.
Is that where I had them last season?
Yeah, that's where you had them last season.
They really overachieved compared to what I thought, didn't they? So maybe they do it again. Yeah. I mean,
you had them in 9th last year. Now you've got them in 10th. 11th and 12th, Steve, are two teams that the reason I was looking at last season's predictions is because I feel like these two teams you always have in 11th and 12th. But I looked back last season and realised you didn't have either of them in 11th and 12th. So take your pick, Steve, out of Odd and Haugesund. Who do you want to go with first?
Let's go with a team that I actually think might be a pleasant surprise this year, and that is Haugesund, who have just been really quite a boring team to discuss. Have we even ever discussed them? Hardly outside of the season preview in the last few years.
Just Bruno Leite.
Yeah, I think Haugesund have flirted too much with danger in recent times, right? They needed to win the last game of the last season to stay up, to confirm it anyway. And they've moved to an interesting manager. Now, there seems to be an influx of Icelandic and Faroe coaches and players into the whole of Scandinavia at the moment. And another one here who's coming, Oscar, the pronunciation for this is difficult, Oscar Hrafen Thorvaldsson, Icelandic manager from Breidablik. Now, another manager who's won the league over there. That Breidablik side won the division, I think 2020 it was. Did really well up there, always on the podium in the Icelandic league. I watched a bit of them in Europe as well. And yeah, they more than held their own considering the resources. Really exciting style under this manager. So I think Haugesund are suddenly going to become a team that might be quite watchable, Jonathan. If this manager operates how he did at Breidablik, then he could be quite offensive-minded and on the front foot. So I'm a bit more encouraged about Haugesund this season. Famous last words. But this is not a typical sort of Haugesund managerial appointment. They usually go with someone quite solid and, reliable. This is definitely a left field appointment. So I'm a little bit more intrigued.
Well, you had them predicted bottom last season. I thought you had them 11th or 12th, but you didn't. So Is it purely the manager that makes you think this, or what's the transfer business been like to give you that point of view? And is there any, maybe, I feel like they're a team where you could get a few fantasy differentials from, if you get what I mean. So let's look at the maybe outside members of their squad and their transfer business, Steve.
They've got a goalkeeper in Egil Selvik who's very popular in fantasy. I think 30% owned. And that's because he's too cheap, really. But I think he might be overused a bit. If their games go a bit basketball-like, end-to-end, then he's going to need to produce some saves. But it's good that they've got him. Amund Vichner, the backup keeper, he's not a bad backup. He's out for the whole season, done his ACL. So they brought in Aslak Faust just this week, I think, from Sandnes. They've signed players, as you would expect. The new manager's brought in someone from Iceland, Anton Logi Ludvigsen in midfield, 21-year-old, quite a lanky, tall guy, I think might go well. And they've got an interesting right wing back, Hjølner Freya Carlsen from Valør. I mean, this is going to be my problem now with Haugesund, isn't it? They're pronouncing all their players' names if he keeps bringing half of Iceland over. So, Yongming Seo.
You'll need to get watching some of that Suomen Cup and a few of the other cup games around that part of the world.
I know.
Brush up on your knowledge.
I know, mate. It's Yongmin So on loan from Dresden, good all rounder as well. Morten Conradsen from Bodø Glimt, a bit more of an experienced head, and a really interesting player up front, Ismail Sione. Apparently one of the best Burkina Faso talents to ever come through in recent years. Striker, physical striker, fast, and he could maybe he could burst onto the scene. So they've already got players in the ranks, like Bruno Leiter's still there, the only midfielder they've retained of significance. They've got players like Martin Samuelson still on the books, extremely talented on his day. Sorry, Ibrahim Diarra up front as well. Sorry, Sondre Liseth. You know, they could be anything really, but I've got a feeling there'll be a pleasant surprise, at least in terms of the neutral, Jonathan. Whether that equates to results, I'm not sure, but I think we'll see quite an attacking team.
Fair enough, and I think this is maybe the longest we've ever spoken about Haugesund, to be fair. You seem to be a little bit optimistic about them, which is quite rare, I find. I've always had a bit of a soft spot for them, I have to say. I do quite like them. And it's good to see that you're sort of not predicting them to finish bottom of the table for a change. So fantastic stuff. And keep an eye out for Sione, I guess. And they've also got, you mentioned, I think, a Korean player. So a bit of a diverse squad as well, which I always like to see. So I think I gave it away a little bit in terms of who you've got next. Just to cap off on Haugesund, obviously they finished 12th last season, so you're predicting them to have just a slightly better season than last year in terms of finishing. But in 12th place this time around, Steve, you've got Odd, who finished last season in 10th. So a little bit of a drop you're predicting this season for Odd.
Yeah, they are going to be what I'm calling my Bismarck of the season. Now, you might wonder what a Bismarck is. It's kind of a betting term for sort of a fade or a lay. Basically, a team or a person or a horse or whatever I think isn't going to do that well. To be honest, I should have the balls here to predict them even lower. At the end of the day, I think they're not going to be that good. I'm not really. I mean, I think I've seen loads of different predictions for them. But I've just got a nagging feeling they might struggle. And the main reason for that is the coach, Paco Johansson, has gone to Häcken. And we'll talk about Häcken, of course, on the Swedish shows this season. But I think Johansson is a really good coach. And there's a few people have said to me down the years that you'll only realise how good he is once he's left Odd. And that just stuck in my mind. And I just wonder, actually, I mean, we've not talked about Odd much in the last couple of seasons because they've just been mid-table all the time. But what if they were really punching above their weight compared to what the capabilities are at the club? Kenneth Docken's coming in now, and he's a former assistant here, and he knows the club and everything. It's going to be 4-3-3. But it might be the sort of appointment that makes them step backwards a bit. I don't know. I've just got a nagging feeling that it's just not going to happen for Odd this season. They've got an interesting mix of experience and youth, which should, in theory, go okay. Like Turgo Berven up front, Andre Hansen's coming in goal, Etaz Hussain in midfield. So they've got that combined with some good youth talent. But just wonder, a team like Odd have had a couple of strong seasons. they're due a weaker one. This could be a year where they even go as low as like 14th, if things go really bad.
Bismarck, I quite like that. I quite like the rapper Bismarcky. But
I'll tell you where it comes from, right? There used to be this
famous, on that one.
there used to be this famous bookmaker who went to the tracks in horse racing in the UK called Barry. Oh, what was his surname? Anyway, he used to have something called Barry's Bismarck every weekend, where he would give like bigger odds on this horse that he thought wasn't going to win. So that's where it comes from, the Bismarck.
Fantastic stuff. And I sort of quite like Odd in a weird way. I don't know why. They're a team. They're sort of quite dependable, aren't they? Quite reliable. If they were sort of I'm trying to think of like, if they were a sandwich, or if they were like a train or something. It's just a reliable turn up on time train that take you to your destination. They won't be late. Won't be any sort of unreliable.
No frills.
You won't get too excited. You won't get much excitement. Kind of like I don't know what kind of dog. Maybe I'll ask listeners that. What dog would Odd be?
A Labrador?
What make? I don't know.
Standard black lab.
I know about as much about dogs as I do penguins, but I just find them quite reliable and dependable. Is that an accurate description?
I think in terms of like league position and never really been too extreme either way. Like we've hardly ever discussed them, have we? Much outside of the season preview, because they just kind of they'll win one week, then they'll draw one, they'll lose one, and so on and so forth. This is a year. I mean, let's talk about some exciting talents, because they've actually had players come through their academy in recent years who have caught the eye, and one name that everyone's on about is Fanil Suelda, of course, the 17-year-old winger, inside forward. He may well burst onto the scene this season. Mikkel Ingebrigtsen's there, of course, former Tromsø man. He's 28 now. It makes me feel old. Youngsters going through like Jesper Svenjusson Skau, I think he's one to watch out for, or Samuel Skedal. So Siva Ass as well, another one. So some of these players might come good, but they might lose some of them in the summer as well. So, and I think there's a doubt. I talked about those experienced players they've brought in. What if Andre Hansen is over the hill? What if Turger Berven? What if there's nothing left in his tank? Do you know what I mean? I don't know, mate. It's got a feeling that Johansson maybe did a better job than we even give him credit for here. And if that was the case, we might start to see that on the field in 2024. 12th place for me. I probably should have the balls to put them 2 places lower, if I'm being honest. Put my money where my mouth is. So I regret that a little bit. So got them 12th for now. I think they have a down sort of year.
Yeah, and just looking at their transfer outs, they've had 2 goalkeepers leave, Braithwaite and Rosbach. They've had a player leave for New York, Steve, 1.65 million euros, Dennis Giengar, as we assess the squad as you've been doing. Are any of the new signings going to make a massive difference before we move on from them?
There's a guy from Odense in Denmark, Mihailo Ivancevic. He's on loan there till the end of July. Tall centre-back might be quite good. You mentioned goalkeeper Leopold Valstad, of course, left last summer to Blackburn as well. And he was a big player for them. Is Andre Hansen? I mean, some are saying Andre Hansen is a brilliant keeper to bring in. He's 34 now. He's won a lot of things with Rosenborg. But he wasn't that impressive, really, in the last year or two, in my opinion. So I don't know. Maybe the change of environment might set him off well again. They're an interesting side. I could see why some people might have them as high as 7th or 8th even. But their cellar is relegation, in my opinion, if things go wrong.
And final question, is it just the manager thing that makes you a little bit more uncertain about them? How good a job did the previous manager do? And do you know much about this new manager?
Well, Kenneth Dokken used to be the assistant under Dag Eilev Fagermo, of course, who was a long-standing manager here, ended up Vålerenga, and I think he's currently out of work, that I know of anyway. Dokken will know the club, and he'll be no mug at all. He's not really had a great career, though. The last time he was a manager, a head coach, was a team called Notodden, and that was 3 or 4 years ago now. So, he's been an assistant manager at Aarhus in Denmark for a couple of seasons. I think there's question marks over Dokken. I just think there's question marks. And also, like I said, the squad itself. The signings might prove to be good, but there's also the question marks like, will they work out? Are there some players that are finished? Will some of the best talented youngsters leave in the summer? So it's those sort of things together that make me think. I mean, I'm putting them 12th. I'm not putting them down or anything. Just think it's a slight drop for them. Well, a bit of a drop for them this season, that's all.
Yep, and you're totally entitled to do so, as your role as the man on this show. So that is Haugesund in 11th, Odd in 12th. We've got Tromsø in 10th, Fredrikstad in 9th. If you haven't heard your team yet, we are edging towards relegation now. 4 teams to go, Steve. 2 of them go down. So let's start discussing the relegation playoffs. At least 3 of these 4 teams are going to be in that category to go down, Steve. So who is the one team left in this league that you think is safe this season in 13th place?
I am predicting in 13th place HamKam, and a team that the last couple of seasons have somewhat flirted with the playoff position at least, but usually have enough. And I think it'll be the same again with them. I've actually seen, last season we had predictions across the board, mostly like 15th or 16th place for HamKam. Some people saying they were a banker to be bottom of the table, and they proved people wrong by eventually surviving relatively with comfort, I suppose. This year, I'm actually seeing people predict them as high as 9th or 10th, which feels a little bit high, I think. Not because they're bad or anything, but because I just think there's some good teams in this league. It's quite a strong Eliteserien overall, but I think sort of in the 11th to 13th range is more realistic for HamKam. Well-coached side under Jakob Mikkelsen, and a shout-out, of course, to the assistant manager, Tom Dent, who we've had on this podcast many times down the years. So we know from the discussions we've had there that in the setup there, not that other clubs are different, of course, but we know that they're well organised. They've got good strategies. And I think the thing I say about HamKam is they've got loads of different tactics up their sleeve. Most clubs have one way of playing in Norway, but HamKam have a lot of different routes. Sort of, if they're playing someone better than them, they'll happily adapt. But if they're the favourite, then they will have a more front foot formation as well. So, when you've got a canny coaching team, I'm always reluctant to ever predict a team to go down. So I don't think they always feel like they're going to have enough about them. But I look at the squad on paper, it's not amazing. They do lack a standout star or stars, which might be not a bad thing. You don't want to be over-reliant, do you? But feels to me, I actually maybe wish I'd put Odd, switched them with Odd, actually. But I think HamKam will have enough to stay afloat.
Are you being generous to HamKam because of our good friendship with Tom Dent, who has been on the show for many consecutive years, their assistant manager?
Well, you could say I've been harsh with them. If like I said, I've seen a few predictions. They're sort of 10th, 11th. So you might say, he might listen to this and think, you know what, we're going to prove you wrong, Steve. We're going to finish towards the top half here. So I just tell it how it sees it. Last season, I didn't predict them in the bottom 3 where everywhere else was. And some were saying, oh, it's because Tom Dent was on the show or that. No, I tell it how it is, Jonathan, with every single team. I am an unbiased machine most of the time. And, I say the way that I've done my analysis and predictions, and I'd say that I've got them down at 14th spot, one above the playoff. But I think it might be a decent gap to the playoff, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I'm glad you said most of the time there. But I think we also have to sort of mention some pretty sad news that came out of HamKam. The young player Archange Defringan Monduo Akias passed away, 19-year-old at the club. He was found dead in his apartment during the last sort of few weeks in March, in late February. So the club's certainly been in a bit of a period of mourning. The general manager, Ben Svella, said that it's a very difficult day for all concerned. And they said that no further comments would be made at this time. I don't think there's been too much since then. So, just want to sort of obviously pass condolences on to the family of Achilles and obviously everyone at HamKam as well. They might be mourning that loss. Steve, from that point of view, I mean, they had one or two decent fantasy players, just moving back onto Football Matters. They had one or two decent players for fantasy teams. For those playing the Norwegian Eliteserien fantasy, is there any one or two players? They had a decent goal scorer last season up front. HamKam, is there any people to look out for in that team?
And yeah, well said, by the way, Jonathan. That was a horrible, devastating news about Mondu there. And, that actually can sort of galvanise the club as well, by the way. That's something which they are very together unit anyway, but something to look at. In terms of, there are some players I like for fantasy for HamKam, actually, mostly because they have a double game week early on. I love the signing of Snorre Strand Nielsen from Kristiansund. Fantastic name player. But I actually think he's a really good right back. Did well for Kristiansund in his time there. They've got him on a free. And they'll be solid, Right? They can be hard to penetrate. They'll have some good tactical systems. If Marcus Sandberg has a good season in goal, he's a goalkeeper you could look at in fantasy for $4.5 million. And I know some are looking at Paul Alexander Kirkevold up front. But it is more competition there. You've got Henrik Udal. Udal's the one you're referring to, I think, who started last season like a train, but he ended up not even the starter. So, and Moses Mar was in the mixer as well. So, Kirkevold is someone to keep an eye on. If he is like a nailed starter, then yeah, you could look at him. But yeah, they're an underrated team often. Lack a star player, which isn't always a bad thing, though, is it? Because then you are together the sum of a unit more.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. Good luck to HamKam. Good luck to Tom Dent. And, you never know. Maybe we'll make a visit to the club at some point. I think it's due. I mean,
I just want to mention one player, actually, who's it's a signing this week, which is low on my notes. Nicholas Odegaard on loan from Molde. He could have a really good season. He needed more minutes, and he obviously wasn't going to get them at Molde. He could potentially have a breakout season. So that's a really good signing.
Keep an eye out for him. And one thing I noticed about HamKam, Steve, is, the famous song, There's Only One, Martin Odegaard. Well, there's only two Odegaards in HamKam's midfield. There is Nicholas Odegaard, spelled Odega with the funny accent. I don't know how you pronounce that, but RD. And then there's Arne Hopland Odegaard, spelled ODEGAARD. So I don't know if that's the fancy spelling or anyway. There are two Odegaards at HamKam this season, not just only one. Moving on, Steve, it's getting spicy now. We've got 3 teams left. One is going to be in relegation playoffs, and 2 are going to be, in your opinion, going down. Do you want to start with the relegated clubs, or do you want to start with the relegation playoff? Don't tell me who you've got yet. Just answer that question.
I would like to start with the relegation playoff.
Okay. In the relegation playoff, Steve, you have got the team who we will refer to as the Great Escape Artists, because last season, with 31 points and a last win on the last day of the season, they avoided automatic relegation in the final week. If you do follow the league, then you probably guessed who it is by now. They finished 13th, relegating Stabæk in the process and condemning Vålerenga as well, who went to a relegation playoff and lost it. So they've gone down. It is, Steve, take it away. I mean, it is, go on.
Sandefjord. I mean, you say the ultimate escape artist, so we've got to predict them in the playoff and then stay up by the skin of their teeth, haven't we? I don't know how they've managed it, actually, the last 2 or 3 years, because, I mean, they've worked wonders, to be honest. Limited resources, often looking like they're down, and then somehow, like the last minute, surviving. So, look, they're a difficult side to predict in a lot of ways because there's been a lot of player turnover, and part of me feels that Sandefjord are just sort of treading water and just waiting to go down one year. They don't, in some ways, ever look like becoming an established Eliteserien team, mostly because they always lose their best talent eventually. Like again, this winter they've lost Sander Foss on a free to Lillestrøm. they always seem to lose players at the wrong time for them. Smurlers was a good player for them last year. He went in the transfer window to, I think, one of the teams in Holland. Jesper Toya's gone to Godset for $500,000. But they do have a decent sort of recruiting force. And, I mean, they brought in about nearly 10, 12 players, I think, overall. They've somehow managed to keep Danilo Al-Saad, the fantastic playmaker, winger who scored a lot of goals last season, chipped in, and they dragged him from like the third or fourth tier of Norwegian football, or sort of Swedish football, I think it was. So they have a knack of getting talent from low levels and doing well, and they've still got their own young starlets in defence. Vettel Vala Egeli, part of the 10 to watch list last season. I can't believe they've kept him, but he seems to like it here, and there's obviously a plan in place for Egeli. He will eventually leave the club. He's too good for Sandefjord. But I do wonder if they could certainly get him, maybe even for the whole season. I don't know, Jonathan, but they're an interesting side. Usually just concede too many goals, though. And that's why I think they'll be in the relegation battle. They're going to have a new pitch this year. That's an interesting thing. They're moving to a plastic pitch. Their own surface was awful. It might suit them to be artificial because they usually have quite a few technical players. So let's keep an eye on that. Their first match of the season at home has been postponed. So then they're not playing week 2 against Tromsø. And that has been rescheduled for the middle of the summer due to this new surface being relayed down.
This will be their 5th consecutive season in Eliteserien and Steve. They're usually a bit of a yo-yo club. For some reason, I always feel like they're not in the league, but they're actually showing a bit of consistency. Like they always seem to sort of.
I think generous of you.
They're a bit like Varberg boys from in Sweden. I think. Like I always feel like maybe we don't talk about them a huge amount, and they just sort of exist, and then just about survive. What can you say? I mean, relegation playoff. You never know who you're going to get in the league below. I mean, they could end up playing a sort of big club from the league below potentially, and it could be a tough one. But what do you see in terms of changes to the squad besides, obviously, like you said, the pitch that you mentioned? What other changes do you think there are? Is there any managerial changes? Is there anything you've seen in pre-season that gives you reasons to be optimistic or pessimistic? What have you seen?
Well, it's a dual managerial combination of. I don't think I've ever mentioned them on this show, but they do deserve a shout out for obviously keeping them up in the last couple of years. Andreas Tegström, who's Swedish, and Hans Erik Odegaard. Now, these guys
another Odegaard.
Yeah, I mean they're like rabbits, aren't they, over there? But they've done really well, and I think what Sandefjord know, they know their limitations. They know they're going to get battered in some matches, but they'll give it a good go. And they've always got goal scoring potential in them because they're lethal on the counter attack. Often have a lot of fast players in the squad. I mean, there's guys that they've brought in. I don't know some of them. I genuinely don't. I don't know much about Beltran and Buka. I don't know much about Andreas van der Spar or Christopher Cheng. Now, these are guys from the lower leagues of Norwegian football who I can guarantee you at least one of them will be surprisingly good. That's the way Sandefjord operate. But they have brought in some more experienced, well-known players. Markovic is on loan from IFK Göteborg. They have brought in Modu Jarjue from Elfsborg. I think that's quite a solid signing. Big lad at the back. And I've heard that a couple of midfielders might be decent. Loris Mettler from Raufoss, quite a slow player, but really good technically. And a guy who's sadly injured until July, Marcus Melchior from Skeid. So, I mean, there's so many ins and outs. That's the thing. Like, the whole defense is reconstructed. So, they're hard to fathom, really, Jonathan. They're usually always in that relegation mixer, though. They'll have some games where they surprise us all and do well, but they will usually just concede too many goals with their style. So I'm predicting in the playoff, they might do better or they might do worse. But they're not a boring team.
Well, I mean, if you've never mentioned their joint managers, then I guess that pretty much sums up what I was saying about the fact that we rarely discuss them because, yeah, I think that kind of sums up really. And maybe we need to do them a little bit more justice this season to come. Yeah, you're just talking about their transfers. I mean, interestingly enough, Steve, just according to Transfermarkt, we didn't touch on this, but there's apparently been in the winter period 138 departures from Eliteserien and 146 arrivals. teams have made 26.9 million so far in transfer income in euros, and they've spent 19.1 million. So it's really quite a high spending league these days in terms of money that it can attract. I mean, just looking at, for example, Moumbagna has won 8 million, and there's been a lot of big deals. But yeah, you've got Sandefjord there. You think that they will be in the relegation playoffs, and then it'll be a case of will they or won't they survive. In terms of Judge, I actually always quite liked him at Elfsborg, but he never really established himself in a weird way. He played in Austria as well and places like that. I think it could be a bit of a shrewd move there. I think he could, sort of maybe. I mean, I personally would argue it's a weaker league than Sweden, but that's maybe a bit biased. But maybe in a weaker league and a weaker team, I think he could have some sort of impact. So I think
they signed another interesting defender called Andreas van der Spar from Sogndal. I've heard a few people talk about him that might be decent. He's injured a little bit at the moment, but he's only 25. So another big lad at the back. So they could have quite a bit of physical presence there, Sandefjord.
Yeah, and in fairness to them, they had the sort of, you mentioned they're not too bad to watch. They had the fourth lowest XG in the league last season. It wasn't too, I mean, that's survival form in terms of goals XG. Hamkam and Haugesund actually had the lowest XG in the league last season, with Odd in the third. And in terms of expected goals against, they were sort of, they weren't too bad, but actually no, they were the worst team in the league. For expected goals against.
Yeah, I like you try and brush over some cracks there, but that's the problem with them. They will always.
Let me finish. 63.58 XG against 55 goals conceded. So way worse than Arlison, who went down, and Hamkam as well, who were the third bottom in that perspective.
Yeah, there's usually too many goals against. That's the problem. They're too open at the back, and that's why I think they'll be down there ultimately, Jonathan. Just and then I think they also might lose like El Sad in the summer. I mean, I can't believe they kept him. He's an 8 million player on fantasy, which is quite a big prize for any club that's expected to be in a relegation battle, isn't it?
Yeah, it is indeed. Let's see how Jarjuwe and the other new signings get on. Because it sounds like you said, they're going to need the defense to do well to keep them up. If you haven't heard your team by now, I've got very bad news for you. We're near the end of the show, and there's only 2 teams left, which means Meatman Soccer thinks you're going down. Last season, Stabæk, Arlison, and Vålerenga were the unfortunate ones. Steve, one of these teams, both of these teams begin with a K. One of them I have a soft spot for. One of them is quite an exciting team in terms of their presence in the league. It's no like guessing now. You've got KFUM Oslo and Kristiansund to go down. Which of the 2 teams have you got bottom? Let's start with the bottom team.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to go with Kristiansund to finish bottom, Jonathan. I know that you do have quite a soft spot for them. I just think that the problem they've had is they've lost some top players. Now, if they managed to keep, like Benjamin Stokke was the top scorer last season, he might have been the top scorer in the whole of Obos, actually. But Breidablik have managed to convince him to go there to Iceland. Turgo Yertsen was, 11 assists, 3 goals. He's gone. They lost Snorstrand Nielsen from defence. So they lost the best defender, they lost the best midfielder, they lost the best attacker. That's a problem, isn't it? That really worries me. So, and it's really hard to replace guys like that, Kristiansund. They came through the playoff, of course, to miraculously beat Vålerenga. And part of me thinks they'd have been better off staying down in Obos and perhaps, rebuilding there this year, perhaps coming up, and then they'll be better prepared next season. Rather than now, what is likely to happen is a real struggle of a campaign in Eliteserien, where I don't think they're going to be terrible or anything, or shambolic, or in recent years, there's been some teams that have been cast adrift at the bottom, like Arlison, for example. I don't think we're going to get that with them, but just looking at the squad, it's asking a lot. I mean, they've retained about half of their players who performed really badly in this level when they got automatically relegated 2 seasons ago. There is some talent as well, but I'm worried. I just am worried, Jonathan. I think they just look like the most obvious team to go down heading into the season. The manager is an interesting one who did quite well with them. I mean, they sacked Christian Mikkelsen. Now, Mikkelsen is a manager who always defied me in Eliteserien. Remember when every week they seemed to do better than they should have done, and Mikkelsen is one of them who did really well. But they sacked him midway through last season and brought in Amund Skiri, who actually has a tremendous record in his first head coach role. Brought him in from Arleston seconds. He won 9 out of 15 games, just a couple of defeats. One of those was to KFUM Oslo, and he took them up via the playoffs. So, he's kind of an up-and-coming coach in terms of like his experience level as a head coach. He might be decent enough, but I think you're only as good as the tools that you got to work with, right? And I think he needs a few more weapons delivered to him during the season.
Needs a few more weapons delivered to him. And, for those who are maybe new listeners to the show or wondering, why does Jonathan have a soft spot for Kristiansund? It goes back to the history of this podcast, actually, because I remember in the early days, I think it was around sort of 2018, 2019, 2020, Kristiansund were a team that regularly defied Meat Man Soccer. Every single time you predicted them to go down or you predict them to lose at the weekend, they would pull off an upset. I remember when they famous win against Rosenborg. There were several games where they just rubbed it in Steve's face, which apologies, Steve, in a lighthearted way. I just quite enjoyed them. I just quite enjoyed watching them frustrate you year after year. So that is why I started to develop a little bit of a soft spot for them. They're based sort of quite near Molde, not too far from Rosenborg as well. So I think that's why there's a bit of an edge to that game. And of course, they play on artificial surface. Most teams in this league, there's only, I think, 4 or 5 teams, 4 teams max that play on natural pitch. And they are not one. So you've got them to get relegated. If there is a shining light, I mean, just looking at some of the transfer business, if there's a shining light, if there's someone they can hold their hat on, who is it? I mean, I've seen they've signed a Nigerian from HB Abuja, Wilfred George Igor, central midfield. I'll keep an eye out for him. Sean McDermott's left, and a few others have left as well, who've had a good history of, as you've mentioned. What is the shining maybe light that could maybe keep them in the league?
Well, they've gone for 2 or 3 players from the Obos again, who obviously they liked what they saw. Ruben Alter from Ranheim could be a good deal. They've actually paid 350,000 for him. He looks like a good all-rounder. Håkon Schatil, he's the replacement for Snorstrand Nielsen at right back from Osane. Quite a fast player. Could go all right. Interesting guy on loan from Aberdeen until July 31st. Habib Gay. So I don't know whether he could be a complete hit or miss. Mikkelsen comes in on loan from Venezia, Icelandic striker. The best player for me to watch out for talent-wise is Max Williamson, a centre-back. He might have even been in one of my 10 to watches, a couple of years ago, I think. I mean, he's 21 now. He should do a pretty good job for them in defence. So, there's positives. The goalkeeper situation isn't great, I don't think. Lansing's coming from Arlesund. I mean, he was the bench player for the team that went rock bottom last year, and it looks like he might be the starter for them now. Although Sereni Mbai can be very hit and miss. So, look, overall, I think it's going to be a real struggle. Just lack of quality. Lost the best players, and probably not really ready for Eliteserien.
The verdict of Meat Man Soccer, I will be backing them this year. Good luck, Kristiansund. You have the power to do it, is what I'll say. Don't listen to this guy. What does he know? It leaves one team left, Steve, and actually there's a very good sort of segue into this, because we've literally just had on air a live listener question from a very popular and famous, well, not famous, but respected sort of listener over the years. We really got a soft spot for this particular listener. Team Overs at Here for Football. Always contributes, always gets involved, and we really appreciate it. So if you're not on Twitter X, follow us at Nordic Football. But we've got a late question here. Which newly promoted club has the best chance to compete for a title? And Steve, I'm going to answer that myself. Yeah, I'm going to answer that myself by saying there's one team who is absolutely, definitely not going to be Steve's answer to compete for a title, because they are the only team left we haven't talked about, and you have predicted them to finish in 15th place, relegation, one place above Kristiansund, who you've predicted to be bottom. Steve, let's talk about KFUM Oslo before you maybe answer the Team Over's question. But KFUM Oslo, Steve, an interesting name, an interesting history, and it's going to be an interesting season ahead for them.
Yes. Actually, the question makes. I mean, Brann came up and finished second last year, so I suppose you could say it's feasible for a team to do it. Fredrikstad would have the best chance of the three promoted teams to have any sort of run at a medal. But KFUM Oslo, I mean, they're an interesting side. By the way, the team that had the highest expected points total in Obos last year, do you know who it was? Kristiansund had the highest X points.
My boys.
Yeah, and this again goes back to what I mentioned earlier with Fredrikstad. Fredrikstad and KFUM Oslo, I think it's fair to say they overachieved last season. And it's because of the defence that they've got. Both went up because they just kept a lot more clean sheets and conceded fewer goals than the other teams, and didn't rely on their offence, which is unusual for Obos. KFUM flirted with the playoffs for years and years under Jürgen Isnes, and then Isnes finally had enough. I think he was like, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to take you up. So Godset managed to convince him to manage them, and he did all right with Godset last year. The interesting thing is his assistant at KFUM, Johan Moisgaard, took them up first season in charge automatically. So it's a 3-4-3 system, which that can easily be converted to 5 at the back, and that's another reason why they're quite solid. The difference between them and Fredrikstad for me is that they don't have the levels of quality. They haven't been as ruthless as Fredrikstad. They are keeping much more loyal with their players. The players that took them up, they're going to have the chance to keep them up, basically, which, I mean, I quite like that in a way. No problem with that. It can very much work. Ranheim, do you remember them? Everyone thought they'd be rock bottom. They finished like top 6, didn't they? So they're a bit like that. Interesting history. They were part of the YMCA group of like North Oslo, I think. Across loads of other sports clubs involved as well. Quite a family club. First 2 matches are going to be at Vålerenga Stadium, while their own one gets done up to about 4,000 capacity. So that's going to be an interesting place to visit, isn't it? A real small ground where the crowd are going to be right on top of you. Good, well coached. Again, like Fredrikstad, the 2 that came up really were well coached, getting the absolute maximum out of this team. I think they'll be quite defensive minded, looking to keep clean sheets. Big problem about scoring goals, though. That's the issue here again. And then I think the lack of goals is a problem which might ultimately see them go down. A bit like Stabæk last season, where there's a period where they could hardly find the back of a net, and the same might happen to KFUM, sadly.
Yeah, I think we need to give a bit more of a... I think we have to talk about KFUM's history. I think it's really fascinating. Founded in 1939. It's an Oslo team as well, Steve, isn't it? So we got another Oslo team, which there aren't too many in Eliteserien, weirdly enough, which I think is quite interesting for a capital city club. The league is
sliding at Vålerenga. Was that from you, Jonathan?
Well, maybe, but I mean, I think when you look at it, I know the history of Norwegian football is very much about sort of the different regions, and I think the North wasn't allowed to play football for a certain period of time, weren't they? There were sort of certain restrictions about the different leagues they played in and things like that. And I know there's a bit of a northern thing and different teams. So having an Oslo team is always good. In terms of their history, yeah, they're founded, as you said, the sports branch of the local YMCA, which is incredible, really. I think they've got divisions in volleyball, track and field, futsal, and association football. And of course, they've been promoted to Eliteserien. They've I think it's the first time in their history. Am I right in saying?
Pretty sure that is the case, yeah.
And if I'm wrong, obviously, please let us know. But we believe they'll be playing for the first time. And I don't know if there's ever been a YMCA team in a top division of a European football division.
Yeah,
I mean, you talked about goal music, Steve. Do they come out to the famous song?
I don't know.
Are we going to hear it? Are we going to hear it? Fun to stay at? Is it fun to stay at the
YMCA? I don't know. Actually. I can't say I saw an awful lot of them. I've been following the Obos, but yeah, mostly on the mute button, I think. But look, I mean, I'm predicting them to go down, but they'll give it a good go. They'll be fighting for tooth and claw. They'll be well coached, and there's some players that I tell you a player I quite like in the middle is Robin Rash and Simon Hestes. Those guys hardly missed a game between them last season. The two key men in this 3-4-3 system, the two most important players for me are the two midfielders. There's a lot on their shoulders. Can they adapt at Eliteserien level? Maybe the manager might need to put an extra body in there eventually. But Rash is known as a brilliant wizard from free kicks, like quarterback type player. They've got good solid looking defenders as you would expect. They kept a lot of clean sheets last season. An interesting player, Momadou Lion NG. I love that name. Big centre back, physical, strong. They've got a couple of Alasimis in the team as well. Ayub Alasimi and Hatim Alasimi, former Amiens player in Liga. Not bad on the left-hand side of defence. He's a new signing. Not too many additions, not too many departures, though, Jonathan. So they're quite a settled team. Where are the goals coming from? They hope Johan Nunez or Obilor or Keke. But I've just got to worry about them in front of goal. I don't think they're going to create many chances. Didn't have a particularly high XG last year. Is their defence going to be good enough to keep them afloat? Unlike Fredrikstad, I don't think they've got the quality.
Yeah, and I know that Lillestrøm is kind of a little bit not really in Oslo, but it's it's obviously quite near, isn't it? It's on the outskirts. Because I've got to say, the manager Steve, Johannes Mosgaard, has given a rallying cry before the season starts. They actually played the last game of the first weekend of the season. They're playing on Tuesday, 2nd of April against HamKam. That'll be their Eliteserien debut, and he has come out and given. I mean, if it was Football Manager, I think I want to play for KFUM Oslo. What he said here, we have faith. We will go out and make history, and at the same time, we will show Norway that I think the nickname of the team is Kaffa, has something to report at this level. I see that the experts are judging us down again, but we are here for a reason. We have a close-knit group with a lot of talent who are willing to give everything, and that is in italics, Steve, everything for each other. And we have a clear plan for how to play. It's a recipe that I believe can be more effective than big budgets. That is some seriously big words. People say they like an underdog, and the Eliteserien has hardly seen a bigger underdog than YMCA, if I'm honest. We are happy for all the support we can get, and I hope for everyone who's a bit curious or just enjoys Norwegian football will turn up to witness our debut in Eliteserien. Now, I don't know if this is because they're expecting nobody to turn up and maybe they have a small following, or if it's just literally a kind of underdog story here, but very interesting words. It's a little bit of a dig here, Steve. The introduction to this article on their website, which is entitled Time to Write New History, says, on Tuesday, the 2nd of April, YMCA will make history when they welcome HamKam at Itinerary Arena in their first ever Eliteserien match. Coach Johannes Mosgaard hopes people will turn up to witness, quote unquote, the debut of Oslo's only top-level team in 2024. I already like this team, Steve. They're getting their slide digs, their rallying cries, they're giving it a bit of the underdog story. Where do I sign up?
Yeah, and a lot of what he said is true, and they will give it a really, really good go. And they're absolutely right to be getting their digs in. They are the only technical club representing from Oslo this season. Vålerenga Stabæk are in the mud, aren't they, compared to KFUM? The nickname is Koffa, I do believe. Koffa is the nickname. That's what they're known as. So, look, this is the thing, right? For them not to be in the bottom three, there's got to be three teams worse. Who could be worse than them? They're on about being the ultimate underdog story. I would actually say Jerv and Ranheim are similar levels in recent years. Ranheim, of course, achieved the impossible for 1 year and stayed up. Jerv were sent straight back packing down. Look, if we say Kristiansund, yeah, they could finish below them. Sandefjord maybe could if things go rat bad. Then you're looking at the playoff as a sort of best case scenario. I mean, anyone could win in the playoff. I just don't see another team, worse than that really is going to get into the bottom three. So they've got a lot on their plate, KFUM Oslo here to survive. I think The manager's going to have to use all of his nous, all of his motivation. And to be quite frank, they may have to recruit in the summer if they're really serious about staying up. But interesting side. You know what's really good, isn't it, though? All three teams coming up. Kristiansund are not a boring team, as we know. KFUM and Fredrikstad. It's not your bog standard Arlesund coming up, is it? Or Start or someone like that. It's two different, interesting teams again, and I absolutely wish all three of the promoted teams well. And in the case of Kristiansund and KFUM, God, that proved me wrong.
Yeah, I think the words of Mr. Mosgaard there have nearly rallied me to consider changing my allegiances already. So you've got hard work, Kristiansund. They wear red and white, and they've gave them some boisterous comments there. So
hold on, I think you've got about 4 allegiances now. You've got Kristiansund, KFUM Oslo, Odd, Haugesund, and you probably like Tromsø when they were defying me last year as well. So you've got, these are adding up now. There's a wall behind you, and I'm expecting to see a collage of shirts adding up throughout the year.
I'm available to the highest bidder and anyone who basically mugs off Steve, essentially. But no, I like the cut of Mr. Mosgaard's jib there with some of his comments. Let's wrap it up then, Steve. Fantastic work you've done on this show. We've got Kristiansund 16th, bottom of the league. KFUM Oslo 15th. Sandefjord in the relegation playoff in 14th. HamKam 13th. Odd 12th. Haugesund 11th. Tromsø in 10th. Fredrikstad, the newly promoted side, in 9th. In the top half, you've got Strømsgodset 8th. Rosenborg 7th, Sarpsborg 6th, Lillestrøm 5th, Viking in 4th, Brann 3rd, Molde 2nd, and title winners Bodø Glimt. That is going to wrap it up for this episode. We are going to have a 10 to watch. We are going to have some content on Patreon, patreon.com/Nordic Football Podcast. I just want to give a massive shout out, by the way, to our subscribers who help us sort of run the show and keep things going, the costs of running it. We really, really appreciate all your support, and we'll have some bonus content for you coming soon, so keep an eye out for that. As well as the 10 to watches. Congratulations, Steve. Well done.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's a pleasure as always. Hope you guys found that insightful. Do join the Fantasy League. Like I said, lowercase here, K9A7WO. So do join that one. And I think that pretty much brings it to a conclusion. Look out for more content from the Nordic Football Podcast this season.
And where can we find you, Steve, if people want to sort of shout at you for your predictions or sort of pat you on the back?
Yeah, at Meatman Soccer is the place for that. What about you?
You can find me at JF Football, at JFFUTBOL, and you can also find the podcast at Nordic Football on Twitter. And if you want to subscribe on YouTube, you can listen to the show that way. We've got over 500 subscribers now. We passed that landmark. We're heading for the 1,000 mark, Steve. Let's do it this season. Thanks so much. Enjoy yourselves. We'll be back in the opening weeks. I'm actually off out to Sweden in the next couple of days. I will be live from Gothenburg for the return, and we'll be doing a Sweden preview, and also I tend to watch it soon as well. So stay tuned for all that content. In the meantime, we will see you very soon, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, everyone. Take care and enjoy the 2024 Eliteserien season.